Study session of the Aurora City Council for Monday, January 3rd, 2022 is called to order. Would the clerk please call the roll?
Mayor Kaufman.
Here.
Mayor Pro Tem Bergen. Councilmember Coombs. Councilmember Coombs.
Present.
Councilmember Gardner.
Here.
Councilmember Drinsky. Councilmember Drinsky. Councilmember Lawson.
Here.
Councilmember Marcano.
Present.
Councilmember Medina.
Here.
Councilmember Mario. Councilmember Mario. Councilmember Sundberg.
Here.
Councilmember Zavanek.
Here.
There's a quorum.
An announcement for the public call-in line.
Thank you for joining tonight's Aurora City Council study session. If you are listening on the phone, please note public comments are not taken during study sessions. The phone line is in listen-only mode. The City Council welcomes comments from residents at regular council meetings on both matters appearing on the agenda and during public invited to be heard. The phone line opens for sign up on those evenings at 6 p.m. Thank you.
And do we have a Spanish version?
No, Mayor.
Okay. There are no issue updates.
Mayor, this is Councilmember Lawson.
Councilmember Lawson?
Yes, I just wanted to ask a question. Usually, I think our first meeting, our first study session, we usually have a list where we talk about our outside committees. And I didn't see that in the backup. I just wanted to know, are we going to have a discussion of this at the next study session? But we usually do it at the first study session.
Katie, I think we usually do it pretty early in the year.
Yeah, we can do it now during the issue update, or you can put it on the next study session, however you'd like to proceed.
I think I'd like to put it on the next study session. The reason why is because I need the entire list before me. It's pretty extensive in terms of and who's on it now. So unfortunately, I'm not prepared to do it right now, but I think you raise an excellent point, Councilmember Lawson, and we'll do it on the next regular study session. The next study session. Consent calendar, items 2A through 2D. Is there any objection to moving the consent calendar forward, items 2A through 2D?
Mayor, this is Councilmember Lawson. I'm sorry. I do have a question on 2A that I would like to ask before moving that one forward.
Very well. Then the question then is moving the consent calendar forward, item number 2B through 2D. Is there any objection to moving the consent calendar forward, item 2B through 2D? I'm sorry, it was 2A. I'm sorry, Councilmember Lawson, which 2A?
And I think Councilmember Coombs had a question as well. She might want to pull something.
Councilmember Coombs?
Mine is also on 2A.
Oh, very well. Okay. Is there any objection to moving item 2B through 2D forward? Seeing none, then item 2B through 2D will move forward. Can we have a brief staff presentation on item number 2A?
Mayor, I can give a brief update for item 2.
Thank you.
Item 2A is appointing 5 members to the new Civic Engagement Commission. The ordinance to create this commission went through Policy Committee in July of 2020, and it was approved by ordinance number 2020-43 in October 19th, 2020 by Council. The backup material in the ordinance states that this commission consists of 15 members, with 5 members appointed each year to staggered 3-year terms. So these are the first 5 members to be appointed to this commission. And there were 18 applications or 18 applicants interviewed, and the backup has the 5 that are being recommended for appointment, and they were interviewed by a cross-departmental team in September and October of 2021.
Questions on item number 2A?
Mayor, this is Councilmember Lawson.
Councilmember Lawson?
I have 2 questions on this. You had 18 applicants, but we only seen 5. Me personally, I would like to see who are the 18 are, because there may be others in that 18 that I may see that might be qualified. It seems like you decided these 5, but there's no backup of the other people who applied. And so I would like to probably see, before me moving this forward, or if it does move forward, that we have all 18 so council can look at them, everyone, to see, if we may have a different choice or a different opinion than what city staff had on these particular recommendations. So,
Councilmember Lawson, this is Roberto.
yes.
Apology for the admission. We had a communication last week with Councilmember Coombs, and I think that's why she was raising her question as well. We intended to include that in the backup in terms of all 18 applications and all their interviews and summaries, and it was inadvertently omitted. So we will include that, and if it's okay, we can table this to the next study session with all those interview applications included, so that you can review them prior to either accepting the 5 recommended from the staff or taking one out or putting one in, whatever the council's choice is. These were only recommendations after the interview process, but it was an omission not to include those in the packet. And so we will include those in the packet and resubmit this for the next study session.
Okay. Well, I won't be supporting 2A because I would like to see the other applicants.
Okay. Councilmember Coombs?
Yeah, just the request, which Roberto covered, to have all the information in the backup, covers most of it. The only other comment I would make is that at several points, staff had communicated that there would be an update on this provided at the PR Plus committee, and that never did occur. Which we can do it at full study session with the whole council, that's fine, but I do want to make sure that at the very least we have the full information while we're doing that.
Well, I'm at this point in time, council is open to Councilmember Coombs as the author of this particular proposal. What do you want to do?
Just have staff provide all the information at the next, and hear this at the next study session.
Is there any objection to having staff provide information on all 18 applicants at the next study session? Seeing no objection, then that's the direction to staff.
Mayor?
I'm sorry, Mayor Pro Tem.
I just wanted to say I am here. I had a little difficulty getting on.
Very well, thank you. Item number 3A, resolution adopting the 2021 hazard mitigation plan, presentation by staff.
Good evening, everyone. Just quickly to those that I haven't met yet, my name is Matt Chapman, and I am a rank of battalion chief in the fire department, but for the last 11 years full-time, been assigned as the emergency manager for the city and responsible for the day-to-day operation of the emergency management office. And tonight, let me see if I can share content, share my screen. I'm not sure I can. All right, is everybody seeing that?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. All right, so just a quick background on the hazard mitigation plan, and this is the update of the 2016 plan, excuse me. And really what the purpose of the plan is, we're required by FEMA to redo this every 5 years and to update it and provide additional analysis to our natural hazards. And we're an all hazards office, so we do focus on any large-scale disaster or emergency, whether that be human caused or natural. This particular plan focuses just on natural natural hazards. And then specific to our geography here in Aurora, some of the ones we may face more often. Biggest thing with this is that we're required for eligibility to apply for mitigation grant programs, which there is quite a bit of funding that FEMA is putting towards mitigation grants, and we'll get into that here in just a second. Also provides us a chance as city staff to collaborate across departments. So we're planning together and coordinated mitigation projects and infrastructure projects. And then again, compliance with our local, state, and federal requirements for funding. That's just a graph, a graphic that the state likes to put up, shows some of the phases of planning as far as emergency management and how mitigation is interwoven across all of these phases, and also the duration of a disaster. So you have the response, we have short-term recovery, short-term unmet needs, and then the long-term recovery, things that we know are going to be taking a while for us to put back together and build back to something hopefully stronger in our infrastructure, and that's where the mitigation part comes in and the disaster recovery. But it is, for consistency, woven throughout the emergency preparedness planning, the mitigation projects across the city, whether it's water, public works, recovery plan, and then the comprehensive planning and preparedness ahead of a disaster or major emergency. These are just some examples of the grant programs that are out there. The BRIC grant, the Building Resilient Infrastructure and Communities, is a big one right now that, again, FEMA is investing a lot of money on the front end of the disaster, knowing that it saves money in the recovery process. This is just another benefit of having this. This is more in line with our water department folks, but it also gives us credit of just having this plan in the community rating system, which provides residents, business owners with reduced insurance costs in the National Flood Insurance Program. So just an additional benefit aside from the grant funding that is available for us. An example here of from about 2011 to 2018. So this is a snapshot of the different grant programs you can see at the top, and it's the money that has been funded to these across the state in that time period. And we have the wildfire mitigation, fuels reduction, flood, landslide, a lot of things that were included in the plan and analysis that was in the plan. If everybody remembers this, around in 2013, this was a section of Peoria during our flooding event. So this is a stat FEMA likes to put out now to kind of bolster that. The money on the front end is worth more than the money in recovery. So they said that every dollar spent on mitigation ultimately saves $3 to $6 in disaster response and recovery when you rebuild. And another example of a mitigation project post-disaster. So when we build this road back, the mitigation in this is we want to build it back stronger so that it takes a greater event to cause this much destruction again. So the history and timeline of the plan, this began around 2005. Many jurisdictions were included in Denver in the Dr. Cog plan, very small section, not much analysis done. About 2010, FEMA declared that would not be enough analysis for most jurisdictions anymore. And the state also, in conversations with their folks, in 2014, they recommended Aurora have our own hazard mitigation plan done and analysis done rather than adopt 3 county plans where the counties were required to put one together. So 2016 was our first City of Aurora mitigation plan. Again, these are on 5-year cycles. 2021, we were due for the update. This was pushed a little bit based on the 2020 activity around COVID and our response to COVID and the things that were delayed because of that response. Again, another example of just the integrated planning across the city. So that all of these plans that you see listed here is just a snapshot of a few of them, definitely not comprehensive. But this is an example of all the departments that have to be pulled in. This is an example of all the conversations that have to be brought in just so that we are on the same page across all of these plans with our mitigation efforts. Again, a snapshot of the different jurisdictions and agencies that are also brought into this planning process from outside the city. This really just lays out what we've done over the past year, the involvement, the different steps, and the involvement of everybody that has gone through this planning process, and the public as well, and the public that was involved in being able to see this plan and being able to add comment to the plan. Our steps to approval, so there's a few steps to go through here. We are post the FEMA first review. So FEMA has approved this plan to move forward for formal adoption by council. Once that happens, then it'll go back to FEMA for their final approval, seeing the council acceptance and adoption of the plan. And in line with this, so there's one disclaimer that we spoke to legal about. So when this was in committee, Councilmember Gruber suggested and recommended, which we agreed with, and we think it's a good recommendation, that in section 6 of this plan, that we're talking about other plans that this integrates with. And he recommended that we add language of how this integrates and references how we do our after action reports in the city. So in speaking with legal, we have not added that language yet. So this becomes a living document once FEMA approves it for the next 5 years. So we can add whatever we want. We can add projects. We can revise it. We can adopt it and change it. So instead of changing the version that FEMA approved and the state saw and reviewed, we're going through with this one, knowing we're going to add the after action language once this becomes adopted in a living document. So we wanted to make sure that got put out there since that was a recommendation in committee. And with that, that is a short background on the hazard mitigation plan. If there are questions.
Questions of staff?
I have a question, Sundberg.
Councilmember Sundberg.
Thank you, Battalion Chief Chapman. Your presentation seems very timely, and thank you for the importance of what you're taking on. I know reading through this, Aurora has unique vulnerabilities with disasters. I think winter storms, hail, lightning is high. Fortunately, tornadoes are low. But for those citizens listening who might be concerned, and we've got some emails about grass fires, brush fires, wildfires. Could you touch briefly on that for our citizens and any mitigation techniques such as controlled burns?
Sure, and there is a presentation I know the fire is putting together for next month's study session on our wildfire capability and components and fighting wildfires. But to touch on some of the mitigation portion, we do have a section in the plan that talks about wildfire, the frequency, the vulnerability, our wildland urban interface, and some of those issues. Some of the population numbers that live in that wildland urban interface, and really just some of the risk that's involved. We have talked through, those areas in the city that are of higher risk, and we do have listed in our mitigation projects within the plan several mitigation, initiatives that would affect wildfires. So evacuation, public alert and warning. If we do need evacuation, or shelter in place. A lot of those that would alert our residents that there is an issue. We have our resource mobilization of getting enough resources on site in a timely manner to take care of an issue before it grows. So we do have mitigation projects that are listed within the plan. Clearing vegetation and clearing area around where you live and your spaces, if you do live in wildland urban interface, is also listed, I believe, as one of the projects in there that's associated with wildland.
And we will have a presentation just to let members of council as well as the public know that on the February 7th study session, there will be a presentation on the urban wildland interface and turn by Aurora Fire Rescue.
Yes, Mayor.
Mayor Pro Tem.
Yeah, I think we all got some of those emails from constituents that were concerned about what happened in Boulder County. So obviously we're having the fire chief do the presentation February 7th, I think you just said. But just for Matt, I'm reading in the huge backup. I don't know how many hundreds of pages it is, but there's a section on wildfires and it has the maps with probability of areas that might have wildfire. So when Chief Gray does his presentation, are you part of that, or is his strictly on the fire response? Because you mentioned communication to alert residents of evacuation procedures and so forth. So is that something that the chief is going to address, or would you be part of that presentation?
Well, I think we've yet to finalize it completely, but it one kind of leads to another, right? So we talk about the wildland response and the wildland resources that we have. And then if we do have a large scale event, then how do those other plans integrate? So then we do have to start implementing the public alert and warning. We do have to start implementing those other plans that come into place. So I think they all kind of are meant to complement each other and flow. So from the time of the response and the wildland tactics to, what else do we need to implement during this emergency?
Would we also work with Public Works, because my area backs up to a lot of open space, my ward, and some of the roads, are already congested. So is there a plan in terms of traffic mitigation as well if such an event happened?
But we look at the area for sure, yeah, and we have talked through scenarios where what does evacuation look like in this particular area of town, and then do we? There's certain, like the snow and ice plan. We've used that before as these are arterials. These need to be the main roads for evacuation in this area, and those kind of concepts. So we have talked evacuation. We would work with Public Works, especially on the recovery end, just with clearing debris and heavy equipment. So we do, like I said, it's multiple plans that are all integrated into each other, from evacuation, public alert, into recovery, where now we're trying to figure out how do we clear these areas? What do we do with debris? Just the damage assessment is another plan, our damage assessment plan that's in place. And then this, like you've seen in Boulder right now with disaster recovery centers and disaster assistance centers. So that's all part of our recovery plan. So we really do, from start to finish to recovery, we have plans that flow together.
Thank you.
Yep.
Further questions?
Mayor.
Staff. Councilmember Coombs.
Yeah, so in 2021, we did have a grass fire in Cherry Creek State Park that moved really quickly, and the response was also equally quick to prevent those homes immediately near the area from having any fires. But one of the things in the aftermath of that was a conversation about how the landscaping and other kind of fencing and other things in the area could help mitigate or potentially increase the impact of that fire and the potential for it to get to the homes. So I know there's clearing out, dead vegetation, but for those areas that are currently at higher risk, is that same approach, that same kind of prevention approach being taken to help those folks determine what could reduce their risk of actually having a structure fire when they're that close to the grasslands?
Yeah, and I think that's part of our public messaging and education, right? If you do live in those wildland urban interfaces, what kind of education can we get out there, or can we do more of for those folks in those areas? Of this is what step you can take to prevent, a loss of property or destruction. So that's definitely, it could be one of our mitigation projects. I know we do have public information, public education for things like HOAs and those kind of citizen groups. And that's something that we could definitely, increase. I believe it's on there as one of our goals, but something we can always increase as far as the education.
Further questions of staff?
Mayor.
Councilmember McConnell.
Thank you, sir. And thank you, Matt, for the presentation. I do have a question for you. In section 376, we talk about opportunities for enhancement. And one of those bullet points that you put in there was become a storm-ready certified community. But I couldn't find any more information on that in the overall plan. So could you give us a quick, kind of summary of what that means and what that would look like for the city?
I think that's another education component, right? Where we bring in subject matter experts, which we've done in the past. Anybody from the National Weather Service that can teach, that can come in and just provide education to our residents and community on anything from spotting to just what you need to know to be prepared for, especially winter storms, which we see on a regular basis that cause us issues in the city, mostly with transportation and stranded motorists and those kind of things. But I think that is another education component that we can increase our activity in.
I have a question.
East of the Sun. Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Sundberg, I apologize for interrupting. Matt, you mentioned winter storms and that preparation and getting stranded motorists rescued. Are there any pieces of equipment like a snowcat or proper vehicles that the city is in need of?
Well, I think we have addressed that from years past. So I know the police department has specialty equipment that they've went out and looked at, and actually I believe ordered. So I don't think the city has received it yet, but I believe it has been ordered, and it's just awaiting arrival. So I know we've taken steps to address that. So some of our vehicles in the past were not quite adequate for some of the deeper snow on the east side of town. That's been supplemented by a fleet with some more capable four-wheel drives in the past for PD vehicles, and now they're getting these ATV type vehicles that they've gone out. They've seen other police departments that run them. I think they went to Vail to see them demonstrated. So it is an area where the resources are being addressed.
Matt, I think we always have the ability of doing a natural emergency to make a request to the governor for the National Guard to augment our capabilities. Is that correct?
That is correct. Yeah, we do have plans in place. We've seen it in the last couple of years. We've utilized it for a pandemic in the snow of emergency declarations, disaster declarations, which then opens up some additional resources. They usually take a little while to arrive, but that does open up some additional options for us.
Okay. Further questions of staff?
Mayor.
Councilmember McConnell.
Thank you, sir. On that same note, Matt, does Aurora Fire Rescue currently have any kind of vehicle that can navigate snow? That's actually something I've heard from a couple of our firefighters in the past, that we're in need of one. And I'm just wondering if that has changed.
Something like a snowcat has been looked at by fire. I think they're in the process of evaluating which type of vehicle would complement their operations better. So some of the ones the police are looking at are a little bit smaller, more maneuverable. Fire was looking at something that they may be able, like a snowcat, could do some patient care, while they're transporting. So they're in the process of evaluating what would be the best vehicle for their needs. Right now, we have several four-wheel drives, more capable four-wheel drive pickups. There's a four-wheel drive engine that's utilized, but as far as snow specific, that's being researched right now.
Further questions of staff? Seeing none, is there any objection to moving item number 3A forward? Seeing no objection, item number 3A will move forward. Thank you, Matt.
Thank you.
Item number 3B, Brothers Redevelopment, Inc. Agreement. Jessica Prosser.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. This agreement is with Brothers Redevelopment for single-family housing rehabilitation program. This program works with folks that own their homes and income qualify to provide needed rehabilitation on their program, or on their houses, energy efficiency, and helps people stay in their homes longer. This is really a continuation of an agreement that we already have with Brothers Redevelopment. We started in 2020. That agreement was not spent all the way down just due to COVID and, having a harder time with coordinating in-home repairs in people's homes. So this would continue the agreement that we started with, which was $200,000. This agreement's for $165,000, utilizing community development block grant money through HUD that we receive each year. So this is just a continuation. It's a restructuring of the type of agreement that we have with them. So that's why it's coming before you this evening. Happy to take any questions.
Questions of staff?
Mayor?
Mayor Pro Tem.
Just one. So, I understand during COVID they couldn't get to all the homes that needed repair. I think in the backup it said that so they were considered a contractor and now they're going to be a subcontractor. So, is there a contractor?
So I know it's confusing. It's really just the HUD mumbo jumbo. So the contractor piece was that they were functioning essentially as a contractor on our behalf of the city. Now they're a subrecipient. So they essentially get the funding from us to then implement the program on our behalf. So if that makes sense, we have other subrecipients where we essentially give them the funding, and then they have to follow all of the HUD guidelines as well. And this, it makes more sense from a auditing and reporting standpoint to have them be a subrecipient and have to follow those guidelines up front. So it's really just kind of a minor change. They're still interfacing with the customers and homeowners, and then they provide us reports. We have satisfaction surveys, and administer anything from an emergency repair where someone's sewer line or furnace isn't working, all the way to up to about a $40,000 loan program where they're rehabbing windows and roofs and things that cost additional dollars. But that's really the only change there, is just the way the agreement's set up and how they're reporting to us.
And then just real quick on communication, like who qualifies for this? How do people know about it?
Yeah, so we obviously have information on our website. A lot of it is word of mouth. We have a lot of seniors that take advantage of the program. We have done water bill stuffers. We have outreached through our Active Adult Center, through the faith-based community. So we probably about twice a year, we do sort of outreach to the community just generally on the program. We also refer people through code enforcement. So when we're out and we, see a problem with the home or the yard or things like that, and folks say, I can't afford that repair, then we get referrals that way as well.
Oh, that's a good idea. Okay, thank you.
No further questions of staff? Seeing none, is there any objection to moving item 3B forward? Seeing no objection, item number 3B will move forward. Item number 3C, Aurora Mobile Response Team Pilot Update, Outcomes, Need, and Evaluation Services. Courtney Tassin.
Hello, Council. Thank you for having me here tonight. Tonight, I will be presenting on the preliminary outcomes of the Aurora Mobile Response Team Pilot. I want to begin by saying thank you to Council for sponsoring this program and getting its implementation up and running. I also want to say that the collateral you received in the one-pager has been updated for this presentation, so information and numbers on that one-pager will not line up with this presentation. And then let me share my screen for you all. Cool. So for those who may be unaware or new to Council, the Aurora Mobile Response Team is a crisis intervention team that pairs a paramedic from South Rocky Mountain with a licensed mental health professional from the Aurora Mental Health Center. The team currently operates Wednesday through Saturday, 10 a.m. to 7 p.m., and they are in their pilot phase until March of 2022. It's currently one team that is staffed. They are operating within Police District 1 in the Northwest Aurora area. The team is responding to low-intensity active mental health calls that come through the City of Aurora Dispatch. This team is unarmed, it does not fulfill any law enforcement duties, and does not respond and will not respond to any calls that have a mention of weapons or a component of active violence to self, others, or property. And as mentioned before, they are dispatched through City of Aurora's Public Safety Communications Dispatch on the police department side. Just some historical information to kind of look at what the implementation process looks like. City Council approved the allocation of funds in November of 2020 to make an alternative response program that is similar to the CAHOOTS program in Eugene, Oregon, and the Denver STAR program. In December of 2020, agreements were signed with the City of Aurora, South Rocky Mountain, and the Aurora Mental Health Center to allocate staff to serve as the licensed mental health professional and the paramedic for this alternative response program. On August 2nd, the program manager's official start date began. And at this point, the development of policies, logistics of operation, and memorandums of understandings began. Throughout August 2nd to the 25th, the mobile response team received various trainings from the Public Safety Communications and the Aurora Police Department's Electronic Services section for support section for police radios and motor computers or MDCs. And then on August 25th, the team began their soft launch, and this allowed the team to familiarize themselves with the technology.
Can you hold just for a second? You're coming in broken. Kitty, is there any way we can fix that?
Courtney, you might want to turn your video off.
Okay, I'll do that. I apologize for that. Thank you for letting me know. that better?
Still a little broken up.
Yeah, unfortunately not.
I apologize. I'm not too sure how to fix it. I just checked my Wi-Fi and it says it's okay. Is it still pretty broken up?
Yes.
Lana, how would you like to proceed?
Why don't,
Freddie,
go ahead, Mayor.
I'm just afraid you're inaudible right now. If staff has any ideas, please put them forward. Otherwise, we'll have to reschedule.
Lana, can you take over?
Yeah, I can take over the presentation. Courtney, if you'd like, well, I don't have the presentation up. I was thinking she could maybe log off and log back on. But I'll just take over the presentation from here. And then hopefully we can get her reconnected. So thank you, Mayor. My name is Lana Dalton. I'm the Homelessness Programs Manager, and I also oversee the mobile response team. As Courtney was saying, our official start date was September 8th of 2021. We fully launched at that point in time and began operations within the Northwest Aurora area. And the team had some significant media coverage during that time. Courtney, can you go to the next slide? So during this process, we wanted to make sure that this team received a lot of training, particularly because it was new and because we find it really important for folks to have an understanding of the population that they're serving, as well as to make sure that safety is number one for them. So they sat with dispatch for quite some time, went through different operations there, made sure that we have protocols and things in place with them. We've gone through harm reduction efforts. We've done mental health first aid for first responders, for both the clinician as well as the paramedic that is on staff through FALC. We've talked through human trafficking, scene safety and situational awareness. So we've had them sit with Aurora Police Department's SWAT sergeant, go through different scenarios to ensure scene safety and things of that nature. And then we've also gone through some specific LGBTQ plus affirming care and best practices with some outside agencies that have specialties in that area. Next slide. As far as safety considerations are concerned, AMRT has been very cautious in regards to making sure that this team is safe, both through standard operating procedures that we've put into place through APD, AFR, as well as dispatch. Aurora Mental Health Center and FALC, we've all sat down, done best practices, and have specific policies and procedures that are in place. We also use bulletproof vests, police radios, and motor dock, and MDT or motor dock technology within the van itself to make sure that we have access to all of the different necessities that are needed if a safety becomes of concern, so people can call in and they have protection on them as well. We've done trainings with our folks. We've fostered collaboration amongst public safety partners. So I think this is really important. We attend briefings with police department. We distribute our AMRT procedures via email to our partners to make sure that everybody is aware of what those policies and procedures are. And then while we're on scene, we make sure that individuals are building those relationships with our police officers as well as our firefighters as well, to make sure that we're connecting with them and to alleviate any sort of on-scene issues that they may see. And then we also have quality assurance checks, meaning that Courtney will go out on scene. She's especially trained in these types of things to make sure that she's reviewing the outcomes of calls, giving pointers, and assisting the existing AMRT that's responding to calls on a regular basis with those safety pointers and things of that nature. Right now, we are in the process of collecting data and program evaluation. We have subcontracted with the Aurora Research Institute to collect specific data points to show everybody at the end of this pilot period. We have client demographics, where calls have been located, whether or not the individuals are experiencing homelessness, et cetera. And we've been collecting this since the start. So we're hoping to provide you a comprehensive report at the end of the 6 months in. You will find some of those data points on your one pager that you received in your backup. Also, some of the current stats that we have so far as of 1/1 of this year, the total calls for service that this team has been dispatched to is 152. We've diverted 11 individuals from the emergency room, providing a cost savings of about $44,000 to our hospital community. We have had 0 calls where police has been needed. So we have never had to call for backup from police due to safety or any of that, due to, I think, all of the safety measures and policies and procedures and trainings that this team has had. And then the cost savings that we've had by alleviating calls from the police department is about $7,500. So that's savings in actual officer time on the road, and providing and getting them back out into the field to respond to more appropriate calls for them. Some of the breakdown of the calls and the call types that you see, lots of welfare checks. So that's those are checks for individuals where other individuals are concerned for people in the community. Maybe there's somebody that's on the corner that someone is worried about that individual, so they call in and they would like a welfare check, or they're concerned about a family member. We've responded to 15 suicidal parties, behavioral calls, very much related to, I would say, behavioral health type of assistance and calls and resources for service. Throughout this process, we've worked with our dispatch partners to make sure that we are not only tracking the calls for service in the area that the AMRT team is responding to, but also throughout the entire city to get a better picture for where the needs are throughout. And what we've seen so far since the launch of the pilot is that there's 719 calls for service that have been identified as appropriate for the AMRT to respond to across the city. Now, obviously, there's no way for one team to respond to all of those, but we want to make sure that we're collecting that data to show those specific hotspots for future need if we were to go that route. Some of the feedback we've received, and I would say that coming from my perspective, very positive feedback from both community members as well as our police and other public safety partners. One of the things that we hear quite a bit is, I wish there were more of you, which is really nice to hear. Courtney and the team has done an amazing job in the field. I would like to just point out that our police department District 1 Sergeant has been very impressed with this team because that's where they are primarily focused out of. And they have done a really good job. And he actually reached out and just gave us some props for all of the service and support, and has immense support for the program. You can go to the next slide. The next one is from a mother of an AMRT client. Just helping a mother that has a daughter that has some mental health challenges to comply and get into the ambulance to be taken to the hospital for stabilization. That's a lot of that, I would say, social work type skill that you're going to see from a specialized team like this, getting people to de-escalate and getting them to comply with different things that may be seen as a need by others, but maybe not themselves. And so the mother was very pleased and would recommend this for others in the community as well. These are just some more positive encounters that the AMRT team has had. They've done some amazing work with our homeless services department in regards to assisting folks that had a broken down car who were out of gas, just, would typically call 911, but they were able to go out and assist in these types of situations, as well as a client that was experiencing some domestic violence in the home. They were helping that person get connected to services and ongoing services in the community. These are just some of the links to the media coverage that has been covered so far. I will say it has been a very popular program thus far in the community, particularly after the launch of STAR and this program here in Aurora. These are some of the most, I would say, sought after programs throughout the nation at this point in time when it comes to a public safety response. So we are very lucky in Aurora to have this and to be able to execute that here. So. And if you have any additional questions, Courtney is obviously the AMRT program manager, and hopefully her audio is working well again, and we're happy to take any questions that you might have.
Sundberg? Thank you for the presentation.
Questions of staff. Councilmember Sundberg.
Hello, thank you for the presentation. So have the two of you been in the field since, did you say September of 2021 or earlier?
Can you guys hear me okay?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Thank you for that question, Councilmember. Yes, our official start date began September 8th of 2021. I have sat along and done a ride along with the team. My past experience, I worked with the Aurora Police Department's crisis response team, so I'm very familiar with this work as well as this demographic specifically within this area. So yes, we've done multiple quality assurance checks by riding along with the team.
Okay, and then also, in your work with this, are you finding a good number of the same callers that you're responding to from time to time, or frequent with the same people?
Great question. So there is quite an overlap between the crisis response team and the Aurora mobile response team. What's been very successful is that we're able to provide an individual with a trauma-informed response, regardless of their current situation. So for example, we had one individual who was known to CRT as someone who was rather dangerous and has just had significant encounters that involved weapons. And then this person called in just stating, I just need support. And we did all of our, preliminary triaging, making sure there were no weapons involved. And the EMRT was able to respond to this individual, and it was actually a very successful outcome. So we're creating this kind of spectrum of care that's worked really well.
And on the behavioral request side of things, can you just give a few examples, again, of the types of calls that you're responding to behaviorally?
Absolutely. So we've had any calls ranging from a child in a group home who was struggling just with behavioral outbursts. The staff wasn't able to really calm them down. So the team with the paramedic and the clinician were able to go in, de-escalate, create a safety plan, not only for the child, but for the staff. Another example is an individual who police had actually requested AMRT to respond and assist on the call. It was an individual who's experiencing suicidal ideation. Police, they did a really good job of trying to de-escalate that individual, and it just kind of exceeded their point of scope. So they requested AMRT, and AMRT was able to successfully get that person to the walk-in crisis center.
Okay, my question is the AMRT, is that team scheduled, does it have a different schedule than the CRT team? Because it feels like there's a lot of overlap between the two.
So currently the AMRT is scheduled Wednesday through Saturday. Now the CRT is scheduled every day of the week. So they are 7 days of the week, and they operate 8 a.m. to, I believe, 10 p.m. So there is some overlap on the end half of the week. Currently the CRT, I believe, has minimal staffing as well, just based on all of the staffing issues and shortages that we're seeing across the nation within public safety, but also within our community mental health agencies. So there is overlap, but with the staffing shortages, we've definitely been able to assist and alleviate some of the calls off of them so that they're able to respond to those higher intensity and potentially more dangerous calls.
Further questions of staff?
Mayor.
Councilmember Combs.
So on that staffing issue, I saw that there was kind of a estimate of costs if we were to staff this citywide. So first, I think is just a question in general, would it be possible to find enough clinicians, and kind of what would we need to do to attract the right clinicians in order to do that? And second, would we need to, or would it be advantageous to perhaps try to contract folks not through Aurora Mental Health, but independently in order to make those hires if we were to increase the size of this team?
Thank you for that question, Councilmember Coombs. To speak to that, just the staffing shortage in general, I do believe a lot of people are passionate in this work. Just having been on my experience with the crisis response team here, a lot of people are interested. It's just a matter of teachability and coachability. It takes a very specific person to do this kind of work. I do believe that it would be possible to staff something like this, as the Denver STAR program has had immense success with getting their clinicians staffed fully. I believe they're up to like 30 clinicians, and don't quote me on that, I'm not positive there. As far as contracting, I really can't speak to that. I'm not sure. I think there are probably many options out there. I will say Aurora Mental Health is currently staffing our crisis response team as well. But as far as whether that's the best route to continue taking, I'm not entirely sure. Obviously, within the mental health field as a whole, pay is just a really big part of it. It's not a very well-paying field, especially when you're paying $100 grand for a master's degree. So I think that's just something to take into account, you know, as a community and as a nation as a whole. But I hope that answers your question a little bit. But as far as future contracting, I'll kind of leave that to upper management and what they feel is best.
Further questions on 3C?
Yes, Mayor.
Mayor Pro Tem and then Councilmember Lawson.
Oh, thank you. So in terms of, I was going to ask the same question on the, that the mayor did on the time, because it's Wednesday through Saturday. And then you said that the CRT program is every day. Do you get this? Is there any information or data on getting the same callers for both programs? Do you guys work together?
We do. So we have collaborative staff meetings in which we operate and we talk about the different clients that we're seeing. We're also talking about high utilizers of the programs that come about. And what we do is we inform all of the other staff of the different safety plans that have been put in place to individuals. So say there's a safety concern for an individual that pops up on a call for an individual that CRT responded to, they'll relay that information to the AMRT so that they can be aware. And we're also working collaboratively to make sure that that spectrum of care that I talked about earlier is being appropriately established within the community. We don't want to, I apologize, my dog is barking. We don't want to delay a response to someone just because of their past history. So say CRT has been on someone many times in the past and their current situation is more appropriate for AMRT. We don't want to limit that person to their response. Something that was very important to me when starting this program was a collaborative approach, because people deserve a trauma-informed response regardless of their situation.
Okay, so if their person is continually calling the same person, 11 individuals were assisted or diverted from I guess going emergency room, right? The ones that are the repeat callers, are they actually getting help, or you know, I mean, if you're just talking to them and you know, calm them down, but you're not really, I guess my question is getting to the core issue and getting them the true help that they need, then it's just going to continue. We're just going to continue getting those calls. So does Aurora Mental Health actually like put them in a program?
So I can speak to that from both sides, from AMRT and my experience with CRT. So within CRT and AMRT, this collaborative approach has been able to safety plan together and get individuals connected to the Aurora Mental Health Center. So I'll give a specific example. We had one individual who was calling about 60 times per month. And through the collaboration of resource referrals, working very collaboratively with their care team at Aurora Mental Health, and anytime they called in to dispatch, what the team would do is they would call the individual via phone rather than sending resources out to that person's address. Just community relationship building and being able to work collaboratively with that care team brought the client's calls down to 3 for a 6-month period. So I think that's pretty significant when you look at it. Also, we have the Fire Community Health Program, High Utilizer Program as well. And AMRT is hoping to work collaboratively with them as well.
Okay, and then my last question is on whether, because the counties are responsible for health and human services. And so this kind of goes between the city and the county in terms of providing services. Does the county fund your program at all?
Currently, the program is just funded through City of Aurora general funds.
Okay, and it's $265,000 right now for the year?
Yes, correct. I believe it was duplicated from the 6-month pilot period. They just allocated the same amount for 2022.
Okay, and then Mayor, may I ask a question to
Please proceed.
To I guess maybe to Jason Batchelor or Roberto or whoever's on the call. So this is a pilot program, correct?
Mayor Pro Tem, it is a 6-month pilot program. So this is just kind of an interim update. Once we get through those 6 months, we'll be working with the evaluator, as mentioned previously, and we'll be coming back with the full data and any recommendations for continuation of the program based on the data and what we've seen thus far in the pilot. So this is just kind of a check-in, and then we'll be back in a couple months.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Further questions of staff?
Mayor.
Oh, I'm sorry, Councilmember Lawson.
Thank you. Courtney, thank you for the presentation. Just a quick question, a little bit deeper dive into the calls with AMRT, the 152 that you addressed. So this is kind of going along with what Mayor Pro Tem was talking about. In the data set, you do have 152 calls. In that data set, is that just per call? How do you, I mean, I think it's kind of important to actually have the duplication as well, because you're saying 152 individual calls, which is helpful, even if the person calling 50 times. I'm just saying in the data though, it would be interesting to see how many of those within this program are duplications. Because I see that as significant. I know that's the question at the very end of this, but I think that that's significant to see if these are duplications and then how that is referenced and how you guys are helping those individuals. Because you could have 500 calls, but someone could be calling 100 times. So sometimes I think there's for me, the deeper dive in the number would be really important in terms of, I know the program is successful, but in terms of really how you're really navigating this program and who's being helped and who's not, possibly.
Absolutely. Thank you for that, council member. That's actually a really great point. So something that we are tracking through the Aurora Research Institute is duplication of services to the same individual as well as their connection to services. I will say in this current data set for the Aurora Mobile Response Team, we've only had one individual that's called in twice. And that is the extent of duplication for the Aurora Mobile Response Team. Any other information regarding high utilizers comes from my experience just working within this population under the law enforcement co-responder model. But thank you for asking. I do think that's a really important thing to capture when we're doing that full evaluation at the end of this.
Further questions?
Mayor Zvonek.
Councilmember Zvonek.
Yeah, Courtney, question. So, and you talked a little bit about the determinations or the factors that are used to determine whether or not the clinician is going out with a paramedic or they're going out with a law enforcement officer through the two programs. Can you dive into that a little bit more? And I just, the context for me asking this question is that one of my biggest fears with this program is, and I've said it to a number of people, that there's going to be a time, my fear is there could be a time where we send a clinician out with a paramedic and we don't know that there's a weapon and it ends up becoming a situation where somebody gets hurt or worse. And I think at that point, there's going to be people looking at us saying, what were you thinking? And so I'd like to know a little bit more about what are those determining factors that you do to determine, or that you take to determine whether you're sending a law enforcement officer or a paramedic.
Absolutely, and thank you for that question. Because working within the CRT and within a law enforcement model, safety was my primary concern and our utmost priority when it came to establishing this program. Now that experience greatly influenced the kind of safety protocols we put into place. So we really focused on triaging and the identification of safety considerations within the call notes that came through the City of Aurora dispatch. So by utilizing the SWAT sergeant, by utilizing the CRT sergeant and CRT clinicians, as well as fire command staff, we were able to identify some criteria of what would be appropriate and not appropriate for an AMRT response. So if in that call note, it says that weapons are unknown, meaning we have no clue if they have a weapon, the AMRT is not allowed to respond. It is only after it's been specifically identified that there are no weapons on scene. Now, I'm also not ignorant to the fact that some people don't give all of the information. I've been working in this specific field for quite some time, and I've definitely seen situations go from very low intensity to high intensity. Something that we've also trained our team in is retreating. Sometimes you're not the best response. Maybe you start off being the best response, but part of your competency is being able to evaluate a situation and determine, you know what, this is out of my scope. They've also been trained on how to request police officers and request cover. Again, we're very thankful that that has not happened. But as far as specific criteria and determining what is appropriate, anything with a weapon, anything with current active violence towards self, others, or property, that comes through in our call notes. And that's why that motor docked computer is so important for this team. They're able to look at all of these call notes coming through in real time, which has been immensely helpful with the success of this program. And that's something that the Denver Star program actually did not have. And whenever they heard that we had this kind of technology within the van to monitor what's truly happening in the call, they thought that was a great idea. So I hope that answers your question a little bit. We really focused on identifying safety considerations.
So just practically speaking, so if somebody calls in and dispatch takes it, they'll make that determination using all of those different factors and say, we're going to send the CRT team versus the mobile response team. And so my follow-up is that you talked about in the notes, there's 11 diversions, and you had mentioned that a lot of times you're able to, through experience with somebody that we're dealing with in the community, just have conversations with them. How many of the diversions were made as a result of not actually having to send the mobile response team or the critical response team, but actually somebody who was in a caller and you're able to identify that they had, existing care with Aurora Mental Health or where?
So thank you for that question. So whenever we're determining a diversion, it's someone who from the call notes maybe would have met criteria for emergency mental health commitment. So the diversion is defined as when an AMRT responds, they're able to keep that individual from being admitted into the emergency department and then able to be remain in the community or utilize a lower level of care. Now, when we look at diversion from police, so most of our calls, we haven't had any kind of police contact. They've been able to self-dispatch themselves. So they're going in lieu of police. Now, about 34 of our calls, police are requesting the team. So just for clarification, diversion there. And I'm sorry, could you repeat the second part of your question?
Yes, no, so it's the diversion from the emergency room diversion. Are there examples in there, and maybe there's not, where the diversion was made without actually having to send people there, without having to send a team to whoever was calling in?
So as far as that, I'm not entirely sure. Whenever it comes to that, I don't know that we necessarily have a way of capturing that within our current data production, but that's something that I definitely want to look into. I think that's a very good point. Currently, it's only marked as a diversion if it receives an actual response.
And so the pilot, the 6-month pilot, that was the same 285 or 265,000. That's what will have been spent in the first 6 months. And that expires in Marchish. Is that right?
Correct. So the pilot period ends in March of 2022. Now we have been reallocated 265 or 268,000 for the entire 2022 year currently.
Further questions?
Mayor.
Councilmember McConnell.
Thank you, sir. And I want to thank you, Courtney, for the presentation and what I think is honestly really good news. When we approved this program, the pilot, I think honestly, y'all have overperformed my expectations in terms of what I'm reading here. And I just want to get some, confirmation from you. The updated numbers that are not in our backup, you said that you've identified over 700 calls that could have been handled by the AMRT.
Correct.
But only had the capacity to handle 152.
Correct.
Okay. And those are calls that are currently being then fielded by AFR or APD or both, depending on the call?
Correct. Or also the CRT.
Right. Okay. So what I'm seeing here is that there's a huge potential for cost savings, for emergency department uses, and for better utilizing APD's time if we could grow the program. Okay, and that's more or less what I'm expecting y'all the case that you're going to be making in a couple of months here, I think, just based off of the way things are going and the information in the backup.
Absolutely.
All right, wonderful. So I just want to thank all of you for your great work. Like I said, I think this is actually exceeding my expectations from when we set up the pilot. and I look forward to the final report in a couple months.
Thank you, Councilmember Marcano.
Further questions?
Mayor Jurenski.
Oh, Councilmember Jurenski.
Yeah, thank you as well for the presentation, Courtney. I think I just want to kind of follow up with what Dustin's, Councilmember Zvonik's concerns are. You had said at one point that they can call for help if they need help from the police, but I think I also heard you say that they're equipped with actual radios. I just want to make sure that these are they equipped with radios?
They are equipped with radios, and I apologize. I should have clarified. When I say call for help, I mean they are communicating via radio through dispatch and officers.
Are these the radios? Are these the same police radios that they would be able to put themselves under duress if they need to? If the situation was so severe, so extreme, that fast that the push of a button places them under duress instead of calling on the radio?
Correct, yes, and they have received extensive training on how to do that and when it is appropriate to do that.
Okay. And they've been given duress training?
Correct.
Police department, okay. And then I also wanted to know, I couldn't see it. You guys are only doing this pilot program in Northwest Aurora right now. The CRT is available, to all of Aurora, I believe. Are you guys at the end of this pilot program in March? Is that when talks of expanding it throughout the city will be, or what? Are we waiting on staffing? More staffing for this program? When will it be available to the entire city? What does that timeline look like?
As far as specific timeline, I can't speak to that, but I will say after our 6-month pilot is completed, we will have a formal analysis done by the Aurora Research Institute that will determine the kind of need, peak hours, peak times, what days of the week are needed the most. And the idea is 24/7 coverage citywide. Now, obviously this crisis response team is not 24/7 either. And we will make do with whatever kind of expansion is seen fit by the city, by council, and by the Aurora Research Institute.
Further questions? Sorry, further questions? Seeing none, is there any objection to moving item number? I'm sorry, is there a question?
Yeah, I'm sorry. I had one more.
Oh, Mayor Pro Tem, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
So in terms, since it's a pilot program for the northern part of the city, does the what is the CRT program, co-responder, does that's anywhere in the city, correct?
Correct. Yes, they are citywide at this time.
Okay, and so we don't know the cost. Right now, it's $265,000 for that particular part of the city. So I guess we would extrapolate that out to maybe 6 times that amount, possibly.
I think the evaluation from ARI will be very helpful in determining what's an appropriate level of cost when it comes to fully staffing a program like this. I've seen some very preliminary data from them and preliminary results from them as well, and they've got a really good handle on what they think is going to be considered full staffing for this program. So I'm excited to show you guys that at the end of March.
And then a question for, do we have a deputy city manager on? Roberto or Jason or?
I'm here.
I'm on.
Yeah, can you, how much are we spending with the co-responder program?
Let me get an answer for you on the co-responder budget here. Just give me just a minute.
Okay. I just want to make sure we're not duplicating.
Mayor Pro Tem, I think that program is approximately 800,000, but
the city,
a large portion of that is funded by grant funding.
Oh, okay. Would this other program be eligible for grant funding?
Mayor Pro Tem, this is Jessica. It would be, and we're actually pursuing some applications for that. There's a possibility of doing some joint applications for CRT and AMRT. And as Courtney mentioned, there's a lot of folks that are looking to fund these types of programs and kind of the innovation and really reducing, the impact on law enforcement, just so law enforcement can get to those other types of calls.
Okay, thank you very much.
I would also like to put that many of these grant applications are really liking the spectrum of care that we're providing by incorporating both a co-responder model and an alternative response similar to Denver.
Further questions?
Mayor, can I just ask a quick question, please?
Councilmember Lawson.
So I just want to wanted to ask. So this program is going to kind of coexist with the other program. We're not trying to. Are we trying to get rid of the CRT program? We're not trying to do that, right? We're just trying to coexist these programs so we can kind of leverage both, some things off of the police department as well as having this other one that's more civilian-like. Is that how I'm interpreting this, or are we looking at something in the future to not have the co-responder program?
I'm happy to answer that question. Sorry, Courtney, if you want to.
Speaking.
This is Lana Dalton from in the Homeless Services. I think it's imperative I've also have experience with the co-responder model and the paramedic mental health responder model in a different city. I think it's imperative to have both because you have the high intensity call as well as the low intensity call, and you need a different response for each. And it's really important to have both of those. So if you need a police officer with you when you are responding to those high intensity calls, that they are available. Whereas if it's more of a behavioral health thing that doesn't rise to the level of that high intensity, you have that other type of response as well available.
And I would like to add, especially when we're looking at the safety considerations that many of the other council members have brought to council today, this helps alleviate those potential situations, and that helps to prevent these potential safety issues within these kind of programs by allowing for multiple responses. And just to echo Lana, everyone deserves a trauma-informed response, whether they have a gun, whether they are just in need of support that day.
Further questions? Seeing none, is there any objection to moving item number 3C forward? Seeing no objection, item number 3C will move forward.
What does that mean? Because they said moving forward.
Oh, I'm sorry. I stand corrected. This is for information only. There's no action required on item number 3C. I stand corrected. Item number 3D, Youth Violence Prevention Program follow-up.
Good evening, Council. If I can share my screen, please. Thank you. Okay, do you all see my screen? Okay, perfect. All righty, good evening. Today's presentation is a follow-up from the December 13th study session. In the backup documentation that you all were provided, you'll have a lot more detailed information to support the information that I'm going to be presenting to you all today. So during the initial year of the program, most of our efforts really did focus on the prevention side of things. And so moving forward into this year, the 2022 calendar year, the program is going to take a more balanced approach to ensure that we're implementing both intervention and prevention efforts and are being developed. We're developing those efforts simultaneously. To ensure that this is possible, the rest of the program staff that have been funded will be hired. And that will help us ensure that we can develop the programming and having those intervention and prevention efforts going on at the same time. By having additional staff, we'll be able to develop our critical incident responses, expand on our referral process to serve at-risk and high-risk youth, and look to release the notice of funding opportunity to contract with community-based organizations to further the intervention response needed to address the current impacts of youth violence. So today we are seeking approval from council to move forward with the following notice of funding opportunity budget. A total of 57.4% of the funding would support the intervention efforts, and a combined 42.59% will fund secondary and primary prevention efforts. A more detailed funding overview is available in your backup documentation that provides more comprehensive description of each of the budget line items. Under the intervention, budget line items, we are looking to fund 3 efforts that include the use of violence interrupters to provide direct outreach after a violent incident in the community has occurred to reduce the likelihood of retaliatory behaviors, and work directly with those connected to the groups actively involved in some of that violent crime. We're also seeking to fund a hospital-based intervention response that is made up of a multidisciplinary approach that combines the efforts of medical staff and a community-based organization to provide safety planning services, trauma-informed care to violently injured patients, and also engage those patients while at the hospital, since their recovery time is a critical opportunity to ensure that we're looking to reduce retaliatory behaviors or any recidivism rates. Actually going back, the third bucket on the intervention side would go towards funding an Aurora-specific stakeholder to provide 3 different therapeutic supports to those individuals exhibiting the most high-risk behaviors, to ensure that there's a behavior change, behavior stabilization, but also reduce some of those antisocial behaviors that we may be seeing. The 3 therapies that we're looking to fund are FFT, MST, and EMDR, which are specialized therapies that have proven to support that behavior change that we are seeking to see in some of our youth. For the secondary category, we're looking to fund organizations to provide a one-time immediate support, funding support until that youth or family can connect to long-term supports. We know that when some of our youth and or families have an emergency need, it takes time to be able to secure some of those funding supports or emergency accesses that we need to ensure that they have. And so what we have seen in other cities is that when families and youth have access to immediate funding supports, there is a higher likelihood that they will engage in a case plan or whatever treatment is in place to reduce some of that violent crime. So we are seeking to fund some of that crisis services funds for our Aurora community. We're also looking to fund an organization to facilitate the Strengthening Families curriculum, which is an evidence-based family skills training for high-risk and general population families. And it's recognized nationally and internationally. And how this works is families and the youth would both attend weekly skills classes where parents will learn parenting skills, and then the youth will really focus on developing some of those life skills, some of those refusal skills to ensure that they're moving away from those at-risk behaviors. Lastly, the third category will support the efforts that will impact the larger community and will seek to reduce some of those community risk factors and provide protective factors overall. So funds will go towards funding daily and annual recreation passes for youth. We have continuously heard from youth that the paying for the daily admission or the annual admission to our rec centers continues to be a barrier. So this will help remove that barrier of some of the youth that we're connecting with. Provide funding to support the development of a youth-specific area in a library that will help provide the community a space specifically where youth can have access to skill building efforts. We'll also look to fund very specific schools that are outlined in your packet that are currently experiencing high levels of youth violence related behaviors. And also partner with a law enforcement agency within Aurora to implement the gang resistance education and training curriculum, which is a great curriculum. It is an evidence-based national curriculum that has replaced DARE, that is meant to be implemented in elementary and middle schools by a law enforcement entity to ensure that we're moving those youth away from some of those at-risk behaviors to include gang violence, substance use, bullying, teen dating, and other risk factors that we know are coming up in our community. We will also seek to fund a faith-based organization to facilitate the implementation of a safe haven program where faith-based organizations and community organizations will work together to respond to critical incidents of gang and gun violence. And then fund very specific programming that comes out of those organizations that are actively part of the YVPP community mobilization team. That includes pop-up events, youth programming, safe passages, just to name a few. We'll also look to continue to fund the quarterly service projects that are led by our Youth Advisory Council in an effort to address an identified risk factor and increase the community's resiliency and quality of life. Applicant requirements include the following, which will support the YDPP program, follows the City of Aurora requirements, ensure that there is some level of transparency and indication of accountability. We also want to make sure that the funded organizations have the ability to leverage resources and support the overall YDPP strategic mission. And these requirements are part of your backup packet, so you can review those a little bit further, more in detail if you would like. So what we will do is we will put together diverse panels to be able to come together to review and score the applications. We will review as a group the organization's narrative, their timeline, metrics, their ability to serve the diverse communities of Aurora, and ensure that, again, they're supportive of the overall YDPP mission. The panel representation will include members of APD, other internal stakeholders, as well as external partners that can offer their expertise around intervention and prevention efforts. And that way we can ensure that we're identifying the most qualified or the best applications that we do receive for funding. Included in your backup documentation, you will find documents that funded organizations are required to submit for us to review. That includes an agreement, a scope of work, as well as their payment reimbursement form that includes some data collection efforts. Okay. During the December study session, Council did request some of this information, so I wanted to follow up and provide more detailed information on our pop-up event series. There is a report in the backup documentation as well that you can review more in detail. So what you see here is a report that includes the name of the organizations that were funded, the awarded amount and the reimbursement amount, description, a number of events, and number of attendees per organization. So as a total, you will see that we hosted 49 events where over 2,400 participants were able to attend. And you'll see the funding that was put aside for the series and the total amount that was actually reimbursed for some of these organizations. In addition to funding the pop-up event series, the YBPP program did fund 3 other stakeholders that did offer other programming in the community. These organizations were community-based entities or partnered with us and are actively part of the community mobilization team. So the first effort that you see here was led by our Youth Advisory Council, who partnered with the Hinckley High School Youth Leadership Team, Mosaic Church, and East Middle School, where all those youth were able to identify 141 families who were provided turkeys, canned food, and other resources. That incident did happen the day after the Hinckley shooting, and it was very, very successful. The second effort supported the youth-led youth forum that was led by A Promising Future. The YBPP program was able to provide funding to support gift card distribution to over 70 youth that did attend a youth-led forum where they were able to provide direct input around youth programming that they want to see in the city of Aurora, but also provide input on other ideas that they have to reduce youth violence within the city. The third effort was the most recent and was in support of an administration of a survey that happened during the Recharge Your Batteries Recreation Center winter break programming. That really allowed us opportunity to gather input from attendees on how we can improve access to our rec centers. The Recharge Your Battery series was successful, and it allowed an average of 74 youth per day to attend Central Rec and an average of 29 youth to attend Moorhead Recreation Center. The winter break was held between December 20th through the 23rd, and then December 27th through the 30th from 2 to 8 p.m. And it allowed youth between the ages of 12 to 17 to have access at no cost to some of our recreation centers. And this supports that prevention strategy and that we want to ensure that youth have access to safe spaces, but also positive adult figures. This was a true collaboration between YBPP, APD, libraries, and pros. So very much appreciate all the support and collaboration. What you see here are some of the 2021 prevention efforts that the program implemented that we will seek to continue to implement in this upcoming year. But we'll also continue to expand on some of our prevention efforts through collaborations with other City of Aurora departments and through the NOFO funding. We want to ensure that we also continue to mobilize our community mobilization team to develop, for example, public awareness campaigns and other efforts. Okay. So with the current infrastructure that we do have as part of the program currently, the program can move forward with the development of an intervention response through the intervention work group to have a multidisciplinary team. This team is made up of both internal and external partners that offer a very specific expertise and access to services and resources to their organizations, whether it's departments of human services, some of our criminal justice partners, law enforcement, some of our regional partners, to ensure that as we're identifying those youth that are at risk and high risk, and we're bringing them to the team to review their situation, that we can refer out and connect them to the resources that they need immediately and for a long term. So this team will help leverage resources and help create that wraparound support that the youth and the family needs. As we start looking to serve at-risk and high-risk youth, it's critical that we do have that wraparound support to ensure that we're also supporting the immediate family. Because we know that if a youth goes back to a home that's unstable, that's going to impact their success rate. And so we want to ensure that we're providing that comprehensive response. The YDPP would take the lead on coordinating this multidisciplinary team, maintaining notes, case plans, supporting the referral process to outside immediate and long-term supports, and also overseeing some of the information sharing and data collection efforts to include some of the recidivism rates to ensure that we can come back to council and share some of the successes that we hope to see out of this effort. This is the 2022 program timeline that will focus on implementing a public health approach that, again, really will focus on a balanced approach that includes intervention and prevention efforts, and also continue to expand on the infrastructure that we need for this program to be successful. Part of the backup documentation that you did receive includes preliminary suggested program infrastructures that we'll continue to explore. The continued review of the infrastructure is definitely needed because what we're trying to develop is complex. And so we will require ongoing conversations around the budget, the staffing, the policies, the support that the overall city will have to provide to be able to develop that infrastructure that we are proposing. The points that you will see on this slide are preliminary findings of some of the gap analysis that we have seen. So it includes lack of understanding around how to respond to youth violence, to having a case management for the program, to having the legal support to ensure that we're in compliance with some of these legal requirements, such as HIPAA. The program staff and its leadership will continue to look into ways to address some of these gaps into 2022, and again, continue to explore the needed program infrastructure to ensure the future success of this program. What you see here is a 4-year timeline. As you can see here, the YBPP program received its funding in 2021 and 2022. It was the preliminary year where we looked to develop and implement some of the initial efforts. In 2022, we will seek to continue to expand on some of our current efforts. The start, again, that exploration of what is the department creation, the needed budget, the staffing patterns that we need to have the organizational structure to support that direct service and response to address youth violence. And then in 2023, the goal will be to create and secure funding to be able to hire and expand the needed program infrastructure. So the question that we have today for council is if you all will approve releasing the notice of funding for 2022 in support of the intervention and prevention strategies that we've identified.
Questions of staff?
Mayor?
Mayor Pro Tem.
Thank you for the presentation. I'm actually overwhelmed. There was a lot in the backup, like a ton, which I do appreciate, but I thought we were going to be a little bit more prescriptive on from what we talked about last time. Like this has completely blown up into, it's like a massive program. I feel like federal government program. And we're, as a city, you know, I appreciate that we're trying to tackle this issue, but what I just saw, it looks like a massive program. So my first question is, have you met with the county, any county departments, officials?
Yes, so we have representation from Adams and Arapahoe County on our work groups. That includes Department of Human Services and Criminal Justice Partners.
And have they told you what programs they have in place?
Yes.
And we don't have any of that in our backup. So what I'd like to know, what programs does the county have that we could be utilizing rather than spending more money that we could just refer people to? Have you met with school officials from
Correct.
Yes. District and APS? Have they told you what resources they have?
Yes. And right now, our schools and other departments do not have the programming in place to address youth violence in the way that this program is trying to address it.
I do know that the schools have received a lot of money through, you know, the ARPA funds and so forth. And as we heard, I can't remember the gentleman's name that spoke to us at the one presentation from the school district. He talked about how many therapists they have, how many psychologists they have, how many counselors. And yet, I mean, I'm kind of blown away about this hospital-based intervention response, $129,000 for 3 full-time positions, specialized mental health treatment, $157,000, full-time position, technical support, so forth, so on. I thought when we funded the youth violence prevention program last year, or whatever it was, for $1.1 million, that we were looking at a few outreach coordinators, and then we were going to develop programs that really worked to identify at risk. This is like, I don't know why would we go into trying to create this gigantic program that really is the responsibility, a lot of it, of counties and Aurora Mental Health and other organizations, not the city government. And I appreciate everything that you have done so far, but honestly, the pop-up events, I don't understand how they're helping at risk. So can you tell me, how do you identify if someone is at risk, or it's just a kid wanting to attend one of the events?
Yeah, so that's a really good question. If we follow that public health approach requires a response that's inclusive of 4 different categories: primary prevention, secondary prevention, intervention, and then the reentry response. Okay, so the primary prevention really looks at how can we serve the overall community? How can we ensure that overall community has access to safe spaces, has access to pro-social activities, has the ability to make connections to others within their community, and really start shifting the norm of the community around the environments that they live in. Part of what we know comes with a lot of the youth violence is that, specifically in the hotspots, is that a lot of the community residents don't feel safe walking or leaving their home. And so by funding these pop-up events, we're essentially creating a safe space for anyone within the community to be able to go and have a safe space, be able to offer the community a way for them to take back some of those hotspots, be able to offer the community a way to connect with some of these service providers that they wouldn't have if these pop-up events wouldn't have been offered. So it's a primary prevention effort where it's serving the overall community. The at-risk population and the high-risk population, that's where our collaboration with our partners is critical. For example, Aurora Police. Aurora Police is in place to provide an investigative public safety response. And so if a detective, if an officer is coming across a youth that's at risk or is high risk, then our program would serve as that entity that would take on some of the work off their workload to ensure that we're addressing those at risk or high risk behaviors and connecting them to the services that are in place.
But
a lot of the youth
are not really in place yet for the intervention part.
No, and that's why we're wanting to fund or have this release of funding to ensure that we're developing and increasing the capacity of Aurora-specific providers to provide those services.
Okay.
And a lot of the youth.
In the backup, where's the RFP? Because we talked about last time, we didn't want to release the funding and we want to go through an RFP process, but maybe I missed it. There was a lot in the backup, but I didn't see anything as far as an RFP, form. What's going out for RFP? What are the questions being asked?
So it's gonna look very different depending on the category because we are funding intervention, secondary prevention, and then primary prevention. So the questions that we're asking an organization going after the mental health funding will look very different as compared to those organizations going after the pop-up event funding.
Right.
And so the specific questions were not included. What was included was a funding strategy overview that gave you very specific numbers and a description of the programs that we do seek to fund.
Yes, but what I would like to see is actually the RFP that is segmented by I understand that you've got different needs, but I'd like to know what's on the RFP, like who is going to be qualified. Do they need to have a business license? How many years of have they served the community? Do they have any kind of reports of successes rather than us just this money going out? But anyway, I appreciate everything you're doing. I have a real issue with how all this that came today, because I think we need to take baby steps with this. And it's like we just are creating this gigantic program and we don't even know what's going to be really the most effective. I would rather see this go much more slowly and pick one thing to focus on, do it well, track it, get the metrics, then move on to a next step. But I also would like to see us look for partners with the county and the schools, and they should be helping us fund this, not just the city. But anyway, thank you. I don't want to take up more time of everybody else.
Further questions?
Mayor?
I'm sorry, let me have Christina respond.
Yeah, if I can add, we followed a very specific process to ensure that we were capturing a lot of the information that's in your backup plan. So we did complete a community assessment that was inclusive of the 600 plus surveys, the 60 plus individuals that participated in the focus groups. That included county representation, school representation, faith-based, parents, youth, to ensure that we were capturing what is it that we need to do within the city of Aurora to develop the Aurora model. And so that's what you do have in front of you, some of that preliminary data. I am working with Rocky Mountain Partnerships to have a final strategic review and strategy that includes the metrics that we'll present to you all. But that's where a lot of that information came, is through that community assessment that was completed over the summer.
Councilmember Marcano.
Thank you, Mayor. Oh, sorry. Do you want to go first, Combs?
I mean, I think the mayor called on me and then we went back. So if I can just ask a couple of clarifying questions.
Go for it.
Councilmember Combs.
So, Christina, correct me if I'm wrong. It seemed like when you did the year by year kind of layout, the purpose of having this notice of funding opportunity is so that in 2022, we can really get some things done while staff are in the process of developing the city specific program that will then lead to using the funds to hire people next year. So this is kind of the notice of funding opportunity is kind of an intermediate step. Is that correct?
Correct. Yeah. So really the notice of funding will allow us the opportunity to fund community-based organizations to do the intervention work that council and others are asking for to address the immediate violent rates that are happening within the community. And it'll also support some of the prevention efforts. And then in 2022, we'll just continue to expand and explore what is that internal infrastructure that we want to have in place.
Okay, thank you. Because I think it's really important that we do something now, that we don't keep saying, oh, we'll do this later, and maybe we just need to do less, when what the community is saying is we need you to do more now, not keep waiting and only do a little bit. We can do more now and be building a sustainable program into the future. So then the next question that I have is with respect to the $10,000 each for pros and libraries and cultural services. What would be the approach if that $10,000 each is not adequate for the demand from the community for those types of services?
The 10,000 for pros would be used to support the daily rec passes. And it's an effort that we're looking to expand. It's an effort that we started in 2021, and we were able to have over 100 youth. It was over 112 youth, I believe, that were able to access recreation passes. The 10,000 would just look to fund an expansion of that effort. It would be sufficient for the year in order for us to really look at partnering with community-based organizations, providing those daily recreation passes, and ensure that youth have access. With the partnership with the library, I am working with Aurora Partners for Thriving Youth and exploring the possibility of then matching the funds. So they would essentially look to potentially match the $10,000 to expand on what we're trying to do in partnership with one of the libraries.
Okay. Yeah, my concern there is just that we often ask our libraries and rec centers to do a lot, and we don't necessarily give them adequate support to do what we're asking them to do in the community. And so if the demand for passes was more than $10,000 worth of passes, would we be able to fund more if needed? And similarly, I'm glad to hear that a community organization is potentially looking to match for the libraries, but there's a lot that falls on our library staff, and that has been exacerbated during the pandemic. So my concern is just that we're actually adequately funding that so that we're really compensating and not overburdening our staff. And then finally, with respect to libraries and cultural services, I know there's a process kind of getting underway now of identifying a new poet laureate for the city. So has there been any discussion of what role that person might be able to play in terms of kind of arts type programming with youth, to kind of help those youth for whom arts programming would be beneficial?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and thank you for the feedback. And the libraries are actually the ones that approached us with the idea of partnering with them on expanding on some of the youth programming. And so they're very open and definitely have the capability, but also expertise and already existing connection with the community to be able to support the expansion of youth-specific programming. And I haven't had any connections with them around what the poet would have as far as partnerships with the program. So it's something that I can follow up with.
Thank you.
Further questions, discussion.
Mayor.
Councilmember O'Connell.
Thank you, sir. And Christina, thank you so much for the presentation. First, I want to ask, I didn't see in the backup, maybe it's lumped into one of the categories here, but the lock-in on New Year's, do you know how many folks ended up attending that?
I don't have the data for that yet.
Okay, yeah, I didn't see it included here, but from what I'm reading, though, we've served about over 2,400 youth, right, with safe zones since the inception of the program, right? Great. And since a comment was made about what the point of these is, I'll just talk a little bit about from my own lived experience. These, to me, seem to provide what a kind of structure or even escape from a, let's say, troubling or problematic living experience at home or with folks in your community when you are home. It's kind of similar to me, the role that baseball played in my life when I was growing up. I and a lot of the folks I grew up with, we weren't always, let's say, straight A students and, acting well, but the introduction of the structure of, some kind of diversionary activities like that and the community building that came as a result really is something that sticks with people, especially with our youth, especially in their formative years. Orchestra, so playing the viola and playing baseball, did those things for me. And eventually some of the other hobbies I was able to get into as my parents' socioeconomic status changed. And these aren't, end all be all solutions. These are very much reactive, short-term kind of approaches. But getting out of a hostile environment for an evening or for several evenings even in a year can make a big difference in the life of our youth. And that's, the way I look at that number, that's 2,400 kids that were able to get out of a bad situation or a, let's say, less than ideal situation throughout the course of a year. Again, that doesn't solve the issue. I think we need to be looking at a lot of the things that Christina has already presented to us at our policy committee meetings and in previous study sessions. I would actually argue that doing things like raising the minimum wage and providing affordable housing or public housing even are, public safety measures, because a lot of these issues derive from bad socioeconomic circumstances that we have the ability to fix if we actually cared to do so. But, we're choosing to be reactive. We have the council that we have, so we're working with the program that we have. But I just want to, ensure that folks don't think that these safe zones are, touchy-feely or not necessary. They actually do provide a really great short-term stopgap. We need to be looking at longer-term things, and I see that we have, rec center support here, library support here, things where we can actually set up longer-term and more sustainable programming for our youth. And one of the things I'd really like to see us look at, and I see that it's, kind of mentioned in the backup already, but I'd like to see what we can do to actually make our rec centers free for our youth, period, as opposed to having, a certain amount of free passes or doing it for a certain amount of time. It's, what is it, an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure. Allowing kids to get into clubs and have activities like this adds that structure, adds that support that I think a lot of people are missing. Some of our home lives might have been very different from the ones that a lot of our youth are experiencing today. And whatever we're able to do to provide a safe environment for our youth, we should be doing. That's our responsibility. It's frankly, it's not the counties or, the states even. I don't think they have programs that deal with this kind of stuff. And our residents, our constituents are asking us to deal with the problem, right? That was a huge issue this last election cycle. So let's do something about the problem. So thank you again, Christina, for the presentation. And you have my support with what you're doing.
Further questions of staff?
Mayor Jurenski.
Councilmember Jurenski.
Yes, a couple things. This, to me, is a great presentation, but I feel like if we continue to talk about this as a youth violence problem and not address it as a gang violence problem, then I think we're already losing this. And I think that this presentation adds to Councilmember Lawson's point that this needs to be under public safety. This is a public safety issue. So I just want to throw that out there. And to Councilmember Marcano, you're right. Some of us do come from backgrounds where we could have been faced with a very different life, maybe one decision away from it. You're right. And to that point, I would just like to say we could discuss maybe getting a job, maybe youth job fairs. I would love to see that in the community and have business owners come forward. I got my first job in the city of Aurora at 14 years old. I had to go to my school counselor to get a special permit to work at that age. I was told those permits aren't even offered anymore at 14. So I don't know whether that's true or not. I would like to see jobs offered. It's going to be a really hard sell for me with $5,000 for a coat drive, something that a community would literally do for free. A coat drive, $5,000 of funding in that. And I understand that sometimes, people with their home lives, if they don't have food and they're wondering where their next meal is going to come from. I understand that can, lead down a dirty and a dark scary path for them. But when you have a gang member in your face saying, I can offer you this, we can sell these things. You need to come with us. We're your family. We can be your family. And we're sitting here talking about a $5,000 coat drive and gathering turkeys. I am a hard sell for anything in this presentation, or that again, it needs to be addressed as gang violence. So I am also a hard sell that these gang members are going to yoga or finding out when the next poet is going to be speaking. I'm a hard sell. I'm not saying I don't want these things in the community, but if we are talking about gang violence, first we need to call it that. Let's talk about it. I am a hard sell for any of this, and this entire gang violence prevention needs to be under public safety, and I'm a hard sell for any of this.
Further questions of staff?
Could I speak?
Or comments? Councilmember Medina.
Thank you, sir. A couple things. Having worked in Northwest Aurora, in Moorhead, and to speak about gangs and to label people, especially all youth, that all violence is related to gangs is asinine at the very least. Having been there, having seen that, having an understanding of that, having worked with police on that and the gang unit, get some information correct. Because what you're doing is creating an opportunity that every youth that does violence is gang related. That's not a fact. That's not true. I know, having worked there, I can tell you that programs work. At Moorhead, a 5,000 square foot facility, when I was working there, attracting 200 and some youth there, we created a lot of opportunities for youth there that got people out of issues that they were in. And I can tell you that 90% of those youth were not gang members. It was just home life. They had issues. As a coach, I can tell you that as well. There's tons of kids that would love to participate in activities, but the fees are too costly. The schools charge $85 just to participate in one activity. That doesn't include anything else if you need equipment and things of that nature. So I do a lot of that myself. I subsidize many of my kids to keep them out of that opportunity of the street, right? The street is not a good place to raise kids, but we need to give kids opportunities. And, we can argue about this all day long, but until you do it and actually live it, have a better understanding, because I do not like to label everybody as that, because then we have a youth that think that, hey, all adults think about us is we're all corrupt, we're all gang members, we all just want to be destructive, and that's not true. What they need is an opportunity to see another avenue, somebody else, a caring adult who shows them a different path that they can do. And certainly, I agree with you. We can do more about jobs, getting people connected. I'm all for that. And that's basically all I got. One other thing for Christina. Are you looking for staffing to be at any of these rec centers, of your staff to be at the rec centers? Because for me, it's about also building trust in the community. And if you're going to be out there working in community, I think you need to be embedded someplace where that people can build those relationships with you and your staff.
Yeah, definitely. And during the Recharge Your Battery series, I only have one outreach specialist, but he went back and forth between both rec centers and was there pretty much for the full 2 weeks. And we also had our youth advisors there on site to ensure that we're increasing awareness around this topic. And then I just wanted to add, gang violence is part of the high risk response. And so gang and gun violence is part of that category under the intervention category. So it's not missing from the plan. It's considered in that category. So if you look at the intervention, secondary prevention and prevention, again, that is your comprehensive response to address all the different levels to include the nexus to gang violence and gun violence.
Further questions?
Mayor Zirinsky.
Councilmember Zirinsky.
Yeah, I would like to respond to that since I felt like that was directed at me. So when I'm talking about gang violence, I'm talking about gangs. Or as the chief talked to about and referred to it as in the last meeting. They can call themselves a clique, they can call themselves a group, a gang, whatever it is. And she said they are operating with a gang mentality. So when we are talking about youth violence, that is what I'm talking about. The rest of this, Councilmember Medina, I don't want to take it away from our community. I'm not saying that we shouldn't, you know, if people are interested in poetry, we shouldn't talk about, you know, poetry. I'm not saying about it. But a $5,000 coat drive that a community would put on for free. I mean, you have business owners like myself that would host a coat drive. I'm just a hard sell to find where these costs are. So I just want to separate. I want to separate the two. There could be that we could talk about at-risk youth. That yes, I would like to, you know, offer them some things, some help. You know, if it's poetry they're interested, whatever it's interested. But if you want to talk about youth violence, if you want to talk about what we are dealing with, the chief was asked, in these situations, are they linked to gangs? These shootings, 16 teenagers shot in Aurora in November. Are they linked to gangs? She said, well, gangs, groups, cliques, whatever they're calling themselves nowadays, that is what we are talking about. That is what we are talking about. So you have to separate the two. I'm not generalizing all children, all youth. That's not what I'm doing here. But if we want to solve a problem, then A, let's call it what it is. And B, let's talk about how we're going to solve that. And that's not a coat drive and gathering turkeys and yoga in the parking lot. That's not that.
Further questions of staff?
Mayor.
Okay, you know, I'm gonna get a sense of the council pretty soon, and we're gonna move forward. But I'll allow a few more questions. Councilmember McConnell.
Thank you, sir. Christina, something was brought up, though, that I actually do have a question about with regards to schools. Number one, we are partnering with APS and Creek in your work, correct?
Correct.
Great, thank you. That's what I thought. So number two, do you know if these districts still have what I know as a co-op program? So that was basically, I want to say my junior year of high school, I was able to, since I was doing okay on my credits, I was able to still earn credits, but actually go seek part-time work to earn an income. So I was doing that. And as I mentioned before, playing baseball, and I was also in orchestra. So that's kind of what kept me busy and kind of, you know, helped me build the discipline and things like that I needed to be successful and got me out and away from some negative influences, right? Is that something that still occurs?
I believe it is, depending on what school the teen is attending, as well as what grades. We are also partnering with Arapahoe Douglas Works, and they're doing a ton around employment, job readiness training, job placement. So they're at the table as well.
All right, thank you. And just a final comment on that, and then I'll let the other folks speak. The connection here between, you know, the arts, athletics, and sure, you know, actual gainful employment. I can't really understate how important it is to be able to provide these opportunities and to demonstrate to our youth that these are things you could be doing aside from potentially hooking up with a clique or whatever and getting up to no good. It was through the co-op program that I was actually able, that I discovered that I really loved games and decided that I wanted to go to school to be a game designer. I wanted to go do what they call level creation, basically. And that didn't work out and I ended up in architecture. But it's things like that that give you hope. And hope is one of the really big things that I think we haven't really talked about at all, but I'm sure, Christina, you can get into a lot. A lot of our youth feel like they don't have a future, that they're worried about a lot of things. They're going through a lot of things at home. They don't know if our society's going to be able to support them, if they're going to be able to find a gainful job, if they're not going to end up, basically shackled to student debt, whatever the case may be. And having all these opportunities addresses those issues, gives people hope, and sets them on a path, a trajectory, hopefully, that will lead to, a much better outcome for them than they otherwise would have had. So all of this really matters. It's all interconnected. And again, thank you for your work, Christina.
Okay, further questions of staff?
Mayor?
Okay, Councilmember Lawson.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Christina, for the presentation. So I do have some questions and then I'll follow up with my comments because I think it's pretty well known how I feel about this whole situation. So the question that I have that I want to get a follow-up on from the last meeting is council had asked about the outreach workers. What is the status of those outreach workers in terms of getting them hired and what's going on with that? Can you just give me a summary of that?
Yes. So currently I have one full-time staff member in place. I have one person scheduled to start on January 18th, and I'm working with HR on recruiting for the rest of the positions. So that posting should be out currently, and if it's not, it should be going out this week.
Okay, when you say the rest of the positions, are you talking about the other outreach workers, or when you're talking about, because I have real issues with pitting $344,000. I really like the violence interrupter. I think that that's a good position. These other things this is my deal with this. And over the holiday, I was out talking to organizations. And I'm looking at the organizations that you guys have provided funding for, which I know that they are people that we know, friends of council members. We know who some of these people are on these organizations. I reached out to organizations and I just don't think, and some of these I've actually tried to connect with you to get information because they're trying to figure out how is this an equitable process to submit their proposal because they're doing things in the community that are really effective and impactful. And it just seems like the people that we have here or the list, I'm not saying they're not doing good work, but it just doesn't seem like to me the process is equitable and fair. And I really have a real issue with that because I went out even over the holidays and talked to people, organizations, and people who are trying to get funding or try to at least be considered. And no response from your department, no idea about how to do the funding. And all these individuals here, I pretty much know who are people in these things. And to me, it looks like it's not a fair process. So I really have an issue with that and how you address that. I hope you do because with this RFP process, and that's why I would like to see how you're going to do that because I see, and who's going to be on that, sitting on that committee and who's going to be determining who gets the funding and who's influencing who. Because I think everybody should have a fair shot at trying to get funding who's doing the work in the community. So I guess my question is to you, when I envisioned this program, and like I said, other council members, have a thought. This looks like we're hiring people. We're doing FTEs. I thought we were going to do what we said we were going to do and basically use the rest of the funding for programming to help these kids and these youth. And there's so many different programs. Like I know a program that helps girls. I know programs that help different people. I mean, it just seems like we're not utilizing this funding in a way that's fair and equitable to me. And so when I'm looking at your primary prevention programs, the Aurora Library Youth Programming efforts, okay, the youth that I talk to, high-risk youth, they're not going to go to the library. So some of these things, the great curriculum, I know understand that's for families, the event series, the safe passages. I think it takes a lot of different perspectives, but this here to me is funding FTEs and not funding what programs. We need the FTEs, but we also need the programs. And there's a lot of different programs out there besides the ones that you have listed here that you are giving funding to. That are doing things. And I think that I don't know what your process is, but it just doesn't seem like it's fair and equitable. So I personally think this is a mess in terms of funding. I think that we need to put a pause on it. And I'm not moving forward. I'm just being very blunt with you. I think you're doing an excellent job, but this needs to be worked out a little bit for me because there's some real issues and gaps in this funding. And I think we need to look at the resources, the gaps that we have a lot of people doing a lot of different things. I think we need to look at where those gaps are, who's doing what, who can contribute to what, instead of just giving out funding and saying, oh, we need to do this. I understand it's a public health, what you're saying, a public health approach, but I also agree with Councilmember Jurinsky and what the chief said. It's a gang problem. It's youth just getting in trouble, not knowing what to do. Youth also facing different issues and circumstances. It's a lot of different things that our council members have talked about. But just to me, this here is just, I mean, it's not what it's not basically, and I'm only one person, it's not what I thought that we should be doing. Programming, you know, and I understand you got to have FTEs, but you're funding FTEs. I mean, for just the specialized mental health treatment one person, $157,000. This is taxpayer dollars. Taxpayers are coming up to me because I sponsored this, asking me, what are you doing with this money? And I you know, I tell them I don't really know what we're doing. So I guess for me, I appreciate what you're doing. I appreciate the road that you're going. Again, I do not agree with this program that it should be where it's at. But I also do believe that there needs to be a pause on this funding until we see how this RFP process is going for the pop-ups, for programs and organizations that want to apply, and to be able to give them a fair shot. Everybody is equitable on a fair playing field, because these individuals here, they're doing good work, but I know people that know them. So there seems like to me there's some influence. So that's my thought on this. I will not be supporting moving this funding available for early 2022. I would like for you to maybe come back with something that's a little bit more like, what are these programs going to do? If you were going to hire these FTEs, what specifically programs are they going to be doing to help? If this hospital-based intervention, I read the backup, but what specific programs? And I don't think this for me gets it. So that's my 2 cents on this. And I appreciate all your work. I do appreciate you. I do think that there's some other things that are kind of keeping you from maybe expanding what you really want to do. But I said that in my last comments. But again, we need to put a pause on this, because there's questions out there in the community about how we're allocating funding and to who and to what kind of programs.
Councilmember Lawson, I just wanted to try to address this a little bit in terms of funding buckets. And so we're not going to know the specifics until we put out some of these requests. So what we heard at the last study session is that we really wanted to focus more on the intervention and not just the pop-up events and prevention. And so the kind of percentages of funding reflect that. We're very open to taking feedback on having, it be 50-50 of intervention and prevention. We can certainly bring back what the applications would look like. But I think what we're going to need to do to be able to get to the specificity that you're suggesting is actually put out the notice and see what the programs are that people are suggesting. These are very preliminary numbers, they're estimates. And so it's really a placeholder for additional mental health funding, violence interrupters. It doesn't mean the city is not hiring those people as FTEs, just to clarify that. And then we really need to hear from those, partner agencies and organizations in the community, what their proposals are, and then we can bring those back to council. But at this point, they're kind of general funding buckets that we're looking to put out to the community to see what their great innovative ideas are, and then be able to bring those back for council to make decisions from there.
Mayor, Mayor
Pro Tem.
Yeah. I have a question on, there's a lot of organizations that we don't need to give funding to, and I don't see them. Junior Achievement, they are a great organization that works with at-risk youth and help them with jobs, that we talked about jobs tonight, and get them that skills training and so forth, and get them on the right path. First of all, there's some churches on here that are getting funding. I never heard of churches getting government funding. I thought it was separation of church and state. Churches that I know of in my area, High Point Church, Eastern Hills, they don't come to us for government funding. You know what they do? They offer volunteers. They actually get people to donate things, food, clothing, whatever. They're happy to help us Gene Roncone, Pastor Roncone was the pastor of High Point Church. He did boots for kids one year. And I helped on that to fundraise and to get monies from different corporations and so forth. We raised enough money that we could supply boots to every child at Crawford Elementary School. Usually churches are doing charity work. And I don't understand giving money to those organizations. So my point is, have we even looked at organizations that are willing to mentor for free, volunteer for free, do donation drives and those type of things, rather than go RFP and here's all the money that, the city of Aurora has, who wants money, I don't think we have a good idea of what we actually need. And we're just like throwing it out there, like who wants to help us and who wants our money, versus being very deliberate and specific on, this is what we need right now, and let's go for that. And then let's see how successful whatever that is, and then break it up into pieces. And then, stage 2, well, we do something else. I just don't feel like we're taking advantage of all the resources that actually exist out there, whether they're county resources, the schools, and the volunteer organizations.
So this process has been very, very deliberate, and it's been very deliberate in that a pretty extensive community assessment was completed. We reviewed national models, local models, best practices. So the funding recommendations that you all have are coming directly from that community assessment. And so we do have a pretty good understanding of what are the gaps. And those are the gaps. We know that within the Aurora community, we don't have providers that can provide a lot of the services that we're looking to fund. And so that's one of the reasons why we're wanting to fund these very specific strategies, are to build the capacity of Aurora-specific community-based organizations to provide that direct service.
Have you gone out, have you talked to people that are willing to do things, offer services for free?
So right now, a lot of these organizations do not have the funding. We know that community-based organizations lack not just the funding, but the infrastructure to be able
there
to
are
provide these
people
services.
that are willing to volunteer their time and give their money, not ask for funding, but literally help fundraise, give money. I feel like we're not even trying that aspect of it. Like we're just, here's our money, that we have a pot of money for everyone to just come apply.
Our community mobilization team is made up of over 40 community-based organizations that include faith-based leaders. We are looking at leveraging resources. We do have, for example, Encounter Church is a really good example where we did partner with them for the Faith in Blue event to provide that code drive and other resources.
I'm sorry to interrupt, but Councilmember Jurenski made a good point. Who needs money to do a coat drive? Or a back to school drive. I raised $10,000 for Colfax Community Network by doing a fundraiser. I didn't need money. No one had to give me money to go and do a fundraiser to do a back to school drive. I just think some of these programs, I'm sorry, I think people took advantage of us.
The code drive is a really good example where the $5,000 was not even 50% of the funding that went towards the Faith in Blue event. The Faith in Blue events were a larger initiative, and the funding that we provided were very small funding stream to support the larger effort. And so what this program is seeking to do is, how do we overall leverage resources with faith-based, with community-based organizations? How do we expand? How do we support families that may not have those direct services? We know that a lot of our families don't have transportation. They don't have the knowledge base to be able to access some of these faith-based organizations or other services. And a lot of the services that are in place that provide a very specific service that we're looking for to address some of that violent behavior aren't in Aurora. And so that automatically it limits the services that our community can access. And so how do we bring some of these services internally is what we're trying to do. How do we ensure that our community has access in their neighborhood to some of these services, so we don't have to deal with the transportation issue, with the language issue, so we don't have to deal with the lack of understanding of how diverse our community is, and ensure that we have a direct service to serve our diverse community.
Yeah, and I appreciate that. I understand that obviously we have unique needs, and certainly I'm not saying I'm opposed to a lot of your programs. I think some of the ideas are really good. I think we need to take it slowly.
Mayor Sundberg.
I'm sorry, Councilmember Sundberg.
Thank you, Christina, for sitting here tonight and the work that you're doing. I think all of us here have a heart for youth, and whether it's coaching or raising money, volunteering, mentoring, we all have a heart for youth. But I want to kind of put you on the hot seat here and ask you a question, and to be honest, if you don't mind, and you may feel uncomfortable, but in your role as a director here, and I know that it's important to have a steering committee and a board and whatnot, but do you feel as a director to craft and put this program in the right direction, do you feel you have autonomy or enough autonomy to do your job?
I'm not a director, I'm a program manager. And so I report to a division manager who then reports to a department director. What I have found being within the city of Aurora is that this conversation is very new. It's very new, and not just internally, but also externally. And so it's taking the overall leadership and network a lot longer to understand why certain practices are the best practices, why certain programming should be in place. And so that's the struggle that I'm, I guess, experiencing, is just the lack of understanding of how to serve at-risk youth and high-risk youth, and how not just to specifically focus on one risk factor, for example, gangs, but how do we look at it from a larger comprehensive response? And how do we ensure that we're partnering with community, but also system-based, to include county partners to implement this comprehensive response that we need to?
Just from an outside perspective, it seems like there's a little paralysis by analysis, so to speak, within the scope of everything. And also, I know that with the material that you provided to us, I saw another scenario, right, and how to structure this whole thing. It almost looked a little more bureaucratic. I know it was more lateral help with some programs, but it looked as if the youth violence prevention program in that scenario would take on more of an approach towards gangs and guns. Did I observe that correctly?
Correct.
Okay. And do you feel that is more of a priority in structuring it that way, or?
The recommended structure wouldn't prioritize gang and gun violence. It would just allow the youth violence prevention program under that structure to specifically focus on gun and gang violence, while taking some of the other approach away from that program and giving it to the municipal diversion program, giving it to the coordinator that would oversee that community engagement and primary prevention effort. And so it would allow for more of a specialized response in the 3 bucket programming areas that were outlined.
Okay, thank you.
Mayor.
Councilmember Zvonek.
Christina, a question, and you may not have the answer to this, but were any of the individuals that were involved in the shootings in the last couple of months, had they been identified as high risk before the shootings?
Yes, some of them were, and some of the families of the Nome Park and the Hinckley shooting were actually directly served either through pop-up events or through some of the other prevention efforts.
So they were served prior to the shootings? And
prior and after. Mm-hmm.
Where was the disconnect in being able to prevent the tragedies?
I would say, especially in speaking to our schools and the school staff that had a direct connection with those youth, is to some of the youth, is being able to have the access to the programming that we're trying to fund.
Right.
That wraparound service.
No further questions.
Mayor.
Councilmember Combs.
So I just had a couple of clarifying questions. With respect to the intervention programming, does that particularly tend to serve youth that are involved in or at risk for involvement in gangs?
Yes. Yes, so the intervention is more specifically geared towards those youth involved in gangs or that have a nexus to gangs, whether it's having been involved in gun violence. So that's specifically addressed through the violence interrupters, through the hospital-based interventions, the specialized mental health. So that will be very specifically geared towards those youth directly involved in gangs and gun shootings.
Okay, and that's more than 50% of the funding recommended, correct?
Correct.
Okay, and then with respect to the prevention activities, which is the remainder of the funding, is that shown to kind of keep people from getting onto that path or moving along the path to being connected to gangs?
It would support, the prevention efforts would support both. It would support preventing kids from going down that path, and it would support identifying kids starting to exhibit some behavioral concern, whether it's at home or in school, and giving them the tools they need to keep them from getting to that point.
Okay, and then finally, with respect to whomever has already received funding versus who might be eligible for funding when this notice of funding opportunity goes out, is there any preference given to people that have already received funding? And is there any reason that organizations that are newly identified and newly apply through this notice of funding opportunity would not be able to access the funds?
Most of the organizations that have already received funding for the pop-up event series don't have the capability necessarily to provide the intervention response that we're looking to fund. And so with that said, a lot of the organizations that we would seek to fund would probably be new organizations that have a specialty or have the capability to provide a service that hasn't been seen in Aurora, or is being provided, but it's being provided by Denver-based organizations.
That's all my questions. Thank you.
Are there any further questions?
What are you?
Councilmember Moreno.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Christina, for your presentation. I think this is incredibly thorough. So I appreciate your work. Just knowledge of all the stakeholdering you have done specifically with youth, right? That kind of philosophy of youth informed decision making is, I think, critical. I sit on our Juvenile Justice and Delinquency Prevention Board for the state of Colorado, and that is a best practice. And I'm seeing a lot of best practice based on local, national data. I think generally I appreciate the direction of where this is going. It sounds like you've probably received a full spectrum of opinions today, so I hope that's not confusing. Moving forward, I too was a little confused just because this was an informational only item, and then there was direction requested of council. So again, I'm sorry that that's a lot to get through. I myself am kind of, question marks all over the place. So just wanted to state that I appreciate what you're doing. What I'm hearing from you is a lot of the feedback that I hear from organizations in my district, and not just in my district, other organizations that say we're not moving fast enough. And then I'm hearing feedback that we're moving too quickly, and maybe the answer is somewhere in between. So I hope that you will take that for what it is and really try to navigate the really strong opinions that you're going to have to get approval from to make some of this funding move forward. Because I do think that we got to continue to invest in our youth. And my question is, you had the gaps analysis, and then you talked a little bit about some barriers. Do you have any other barriers as a result of doing that gap analysis that you think that you can address in the near future?
I would say a barrier that I'm seeing, especially around the funding, is I to some extent do agree with Councilman Lawson where specific organizations have continued to receive a lot of the funding, and part of the process that I did follow for the pop-up event funding was to open it up to organizations that have not gotten funding. And so I think that's an ask that I do have for council, is that we are open to funding new organizations, and not just new organizations, but organizations that have the capacity to do this work and have the capacity to leverage resources with the program and support the overall mission. I do think that's part of the issue that I am seeing is that organizations have been provided funding and it's a one-time fund or a one-time effort, but we really do need to ensure that we're building capacity and we're looking to fund long-term efforts that can truly have an impact and increase the capacity of our community.
Further questions?
Mayor, just a quick.
Councilmember Moreno.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you for that feedback. My question, I think, you know, I don't know where every individual organization is at in terms of capacity, just generally capacity in this really difficult time, etc. Is there anything that maybe not you or the department that you're under has in terms of resources to help organizations build capacity? You know, I think we're talking about issues and struggles with Aurora-based organizations. One of the biggest feedback that I get from these, you know, community-based organizations is they do really good work, they have really great outcomes, but they can't scale. There's very little opportunity for them to transfer, you know, learn from other organizations that have been around a lot longer, who have, you know, and if we're talking about the same organizations doing the same thing, getting the same funding, to me that seems like kind of a need as well, if we want to address that concern. Are you aware, can you share of any capacity building efforts that we can help get, you know, more online to support our efforts?
Yeah, I think there are several opportunities. One is we are going to be offering a professional development series. I'm working with Courtney and Lana on offering that, and it's something that I hope to offer both internally and externally to be able to build capacity of our stakeholders. I think organizations also being part of our work groups is crucial. That's another barrier that I would ask council to consider, in that there's organizations that are truly engaged in the work and are wanting to learn, are wanting to support the overall effort of the program and each other's efforts. And we have organizations that just want the funding and not be part of the overall work. And so I would say that's another really good opportunity, is for organizations to get involved in the community mobilization team and be part of the ongoing conversation where we are identifying other activities that aren't funded by us. And training opportunities, and they're connecting and building capacity on their own without us being involved. And I would say that's another important, you know, thing to consider, is that the youth forum was something that the community decided to do on their own after being involved in our community mobilization team. So how can organizations actively participate in those conversations to be able to support the Aurora community-led efforts?
Of supporting as council support of the next steps outlined and releasing a notice of funding availability in early 2022. I think it's going to be fairly close, so let me go down the list. Councilmember Lawson.
No, I will not be supporting this at this time.
Councilmember Gardner. No, Councilmember Gardner is ill, unfortunately, and so I'm not sure if he was able to stay with us. Councilmember Zvonek?
No.
Councilmember Jurenski?
No.
Councilmember Moreno?
Yes.
Councilmember Sundberg?
No, not at this time.
Councilmember Medina?
Yes.
Councilmember Mercado?
Yes.
Councilmember Coombs?
Yes.
Mayor Pro Tem?
Not at this time, no.
Chief. I'm also going to ask that the youth violence prevention program come back to us, work with some of the members that have had reservations on certain parts of the program, and obviously the goal is for you to get the majority of support. I think it's critical for us to go forward with a program. I think that there are elements that there are some questions on, and so I think that this is critical enough that I'm not going to wait until the next study session. We will have a special study session. Mayor Pro Tem.
I appreciate that, but if it comes back too soon, I don't think we're going to have time to, like you're asking us to kind of formulate our thoughts as to what part of this needs to go forward. And I agree, like there's part of it, but if this has to be on the next study session, for me personally, it's not going to be enough time.
On the next study session? You mean on a special study session?
Yeah, it depends how soon you want that, because I personally.
I'll look and see. Obviously, there has to be adequate time. And if I don't think that there's going to be adequate time and it does have to go to the next study session, then I'll make that determination. I'll work with Christina in terms of her time frame and her ability to work with the members on their specific reservations in order to have majority support.
And Mayor Kaufman, can I just say something? I'm not against this program at all. Of course, you and I went and did a lot of the land work for it. But what I am concerned about how the funding is being allocated. And I think for me, I would like to see how the RFP process is going to look, how they're going to be adapting to this funding piece, because that's the critical issue. And I don't know what other community members are hearing, but that's what I'm hearing. So I'm not against this program and trying to stop the program, and nowhere we need this program. I just think that there's a problem with the funding, and I think we need to kind of look at where these gaps are, where we actually have all these different, we have different programs, we have different people doing different things. To me, it's just not meshing together.
Okay. There is not, at this time, it will not move forward. We will, let's see. Item number 3D will not move forward at this time. We will, the time is now 9:01. Council will stand in recess until 9:06. Council is now in recess. Time is now 9:06. Council is back in session. Item number 3E, removal and cleaning of unauthorized encampments on Colorado Department of Transportation properties. Lana Dalton.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. My name is Lana Dalton. I'm the Homelessness Programs Manager for the City of Aurora. Per Council's request, we have been working with our partners at CDOT to get to an intergovernmental agreement to expedite cleaning of abatements on CDOT property that are in the City of Aurora. We have come to an agreement on that and on both sides. And so what you have in your backup is the actual IGA, and we are looking for approval of that IGA to move forward.
Discussion, questions of staff?
Mayor.
Councilmember McConnell.
Thank you, sir. Lana, thank you for the brief summary and for the backup. I do have a couple of concerns about what's presented to us here. When I originally brought this up with y'all, with Councilmember Coombs, we had talked about, trash and large debris that was often left in the public right-of-way that we would get a lot of complaints about. Some of that was associated with unhoused camps. Some of it was just dumped. And what I am seeing, what I have read, is that basically this is CDOT trying to, well, not trying to, but rather allowing us to conduct abatements in their stead, but only giving us $75,000 to do it. And I think those are kind of two very different scopes. And how much did we spend on abatement last year? It was around $250,000 if memory serves, right?
So correct, and that did not include CDOT abatements. We didn't include that in our figure. What I can say to this specifically is that it does include the trash as well. So anytime we find anything trash and otherwise, or there is an encampment as well, it is covered by this cost. There's a specific process involved where we have to go take pictures. We get that approved through CDOT, then, we get to move forward with the abatement if they approve, and then we submit them invoices on a monthly basis, and they reimburse us for that. It not only helps us with the trash issue that we found, but also assists with many of the complaints that we receive from constituents in the community regarding encampments that are in dangerous areas. So for instance, like on I-225, any of those corridors, it allows us to kind of move quicker than maybe what CDOT has in place. And it also allows us to provide additional safety measures for those folks that are experiencing homelessness, because really it's unsafe for them to be in that locale. But just because of CDOT's capacity, they don't have the ability to abate as quickly as we would like. So.
And I completely agree that a lot of those areas that you described are exceptionally dangerous and completely unsuitable for any kind of habitation. I'm just concerned that the amount for this broad scope is not going to be anywhere near what we would really need to, handle the load, especially as, if after things warm up, we see a resurgence, which I think we likely will, of our unhoused population and probably some new additions. So
yeah, sorry, Councilmember Marcano, and we started with 75,000. We can increase that amount with them. They were amenable to that. They just wanted to start at this level, and so we can always do an amendment to that, and they were agreeable to that.
All right, and Mayor, can I ask one more follow-up? Mayor, I think you're muted.
Right. Please proceed. Yes, sir.
All right, thank you, sir. And I guess my last question here, is there a way that we can also allocate some of this funding, not just if we're going to do this, just for the cleanup, but actually for a place so these folks can actually touch down? And because my biggest concern is that, okay, we're going to take over abatement responsibilities to some extent from CDOT, and then we're going to abate, let's say, 225 in Mississippi, and then those folks are going to end up back on one of the creeks in Ward 4. And then we're going to just get a call from, neighbors back there again, and we're just going to continue this game of whack-a-mole that I've referenced a million times. So if we're going to actually get an intergovernmental partner, can we actually get some funding to house these people as well?
That's a great question. That wasn't something that was proposed in the current IGA, but we're happy to ask that question.
Thank you.
Further discussion, questions of staff? Councilmember Coombs.
So just to clarify, when this says abatement, it's not the way we normally talk about abatement as being specifically about encampments, but it's also about these complaints that Councilmember Marcano and I both have received a lot of regarding trash dumped all along these rights of way that we don't have jurisdiction over.
That is correct.
Further questions? Seeing no further questions, is there opposition to moving item number 3E forward? Seeing none, then item number 3E will move forward. Thank you, Alana. Item number 5A, resolution to adopt rules and regulations for lobbyist registration ordinance. Councilmember Lawson.
Thank you, Mayor. So basically, this ordinance passed on March 22nd, 2021. This particular ordinance, the resolution is complementary to the actual ordinance, where it would allow the clerk to actually promulgate rules and regulations according to the ordinance for lobbyists. So it's just basically to just give the clerk the authority to do so, ensuring that lobbyists follow the rules. If there's any type of complaints or anything that comes before that someone has been lobbying, that they would be able to conduct a hearing as well. So I have in the backup, what you see is what some of the additions to what the code would look like. And also, if there's any questions that you have from the period that this passed, we haven't been doing an enforcement. We have been doing training and addressing questions from different lobbying individuals and organizations. So now the first report would be due January 15th of this year. So people who are conducting lobbying in our city would have to register and actually complete quarterly reports starting January 15th of 2022. So I would be able to address any questions. Dan Lathers is on here as well as Rachel Allen for any questions or comments you may have.
Questions for Councilmember Lawson and staff? Well, seeing none, congratulations. I'm sorry.
Mayor Pro Tem would have one.
Okay, Mayor Pro Tem.
Okay,
I was just going to congratulate you on the passage.
I almost made it, but I didn't make it so much.
Okay, Mayor Pro Tem.
Sorry. Okay, so I don't have a problem with the lobbying ordinance. My question is just, again, on the definition of lobbyist, just for clarification. So, like, if you're lobbied by a union, do they register? Do unions register? Does anybody know?
Yes, Dave Lathers speaking.
Yes.
Rachel Allen, unfortunately, she has a conflict this evening. She can't appear. Yes, it does not matter the provenance of where lobbying comes from.
Okay.
Rather, it matters that there is lobbying activity taking place. So a union representative could be acting as a lobbyist. An attorney could be acting as a lobbyist. A lobbyist could be acting as a lobbyist. An industry expert or insider, a CEO, any of them could be acting as lobbyists under our ordinance. So it is the activity rather than how they choose to label themselves or hold themselves forward to the public.
So they would have to register.
If they conduct lobbying activity within the city, they would need to register, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Further questions of the proposal sponsor or staff?
Mayor.
Councilmember Coombs.
What about constituents who are members of community organizations? Like there's a group, What the Frack Arapaho. They're not a formal organization. They're a group of people that oppose fracking and work together on those issues. Would they have to register as lobbyists in order to come talk to city council about their issue?
No, Councilmember Coombs and Dale, you can look, I'm looking at the definition of covered official and they would not be considered a covered official.
Further questions of the proposal sponsor or for staff? Seeing none, is there any objection to moving item number 5A forward? Seeing no objection, 5A will move forward. Item number 6A, Council Rules of Order and Procedures, Rules E and F. City Attorney Dan Brossman.
Good evening. Tonight we're going to do a real brief piece on the council rules. Starting out, council rules under the charter are permitted under section 3.6. So council is allowed to adopt procedures. Those procedures, the restriction is, can't obviously violate the charter itself. Section 5.1 of the charter actually lists the how council actually acts. You act through an ordinance, a resolution, or a motion. So we're going to jump to the actual rules themselves on E and F of the council rules of order and procedure. Again, the charter allowed council to adopt these rules. The rules themselves then adopt, and the council rules of order and procedure are on the city's website, so everybody can look that up and find that. The rules then adopt the Garfield-Jones parliamentary procedure at a glance rules to actually that's our governing, that's instead of Robert's Rules of Orders, we use Garfield instead. It's a summarized version of the rules. They're really straightforward, how to make motions, and then when a second is required, when a 2/3 majority rather than a majority is required under the rules. They're simple. It's very simple. It's very straightforward. It's a very nice little guide to follow. Again, not formal on Robert's Rules, which is a little bit different than a lot of places. Again, the rules of Garfield apply if the council rules don't preempt that. So one of the very first sections is order of business. So we follow the council's order of business, and that's been debated on a number of times by this council and previous councils on what the order of the regular meeting should be. And I should clarify, we're talking about the regular meeting of council. We're not talking about executive sessions. We're not talking about study sessions. Council may not actually have a motion in executive session. You're not to make the decision formally through a motion in executive session. You're giving direction in executive session to council appointees. In study session, you're following a much more informal approach than you are in the regular meeting. So these rules are as to the regular meeting. And they list the order that you do business on the agenda. They address how public comment items come forward. They address, simple things of how the two different pieces. One is a regular legislative item, how that actually discussion takes place. You then move the item. That is a very different procedure than the public hearing approach, which you open the public hearing, there are presentations, and the motion is made at the beginning of a public hearing. So they're a little bit different. There's a discussion of use of the consent calendar and what items can be under the consent calendar. There's the nomination or or appointment procedure, which council has dealt with a number of times recently. Section F, again, goes back to the charter section 5.1, everything moving through by ordinance, by resolution, or by motion. Again, under section 3.2 of the charter, the mayor does not vote on ordinances and resolutions except to make or break a tie. That's actually in the charter, and then it's reaffirmed later in the rules. There is, during the regular meeting, the rules are a little bit different as to motions to table an item. In Garfield, that is not debatable. Under Roberts, that's not debatable. Under the Aurora Council rules, that is debatable. So you can just, when a motion is made to table an item, you can have discussion around that, around tabling the item. Conflicts are addressed as well. Tie votes, again, are addressed and that is a different procedure than is in Garfield on tie votes coming back to council. And again, there is a 6th vote that is different than Garfield. So these are your procedural differences, the motions themselves, whether you're going to continue an item, whether you're going to move the item originally, whether you want to, close debate on an item. Again, closing debate is very different in study session than it is in formal session. So limiting debate in a formal session actually requires a 2/3 vote of council to limit debate of an item. Study session is information gathering, so the mayor has even more discretion in how he makes those decisions at study session on keeping the agenda moving and items proceeding through the process. Again, the role going back to Rule E, the city attorney is the parliamentarian for council. The advice is given to the mayor. The mayor's decision is final unless, and there is one exception, there is an appeal. An appeal is a majority appeal of the mayor's decision. And it's simply, the mayor makes a decision, somebody says, I'd like to appeal that. If a majority of council wants to appeal it, then it is appealed and you move on in that direction. If a majority doesn't have that, then the item goes as the mayor has indicated. I kept this really brief. Well, to make this easy, just as a sort of a 101 on our procedures, and I'd be happy to take any questions if anybody has any.
Questions of the city manager? I'm sorry, city attorney. Ouch. Questions of the city attorney?
I'd like to appeal the mayor. No, I'm just kidding.
Yeah. appeal the mayor, period. Okay. Further questions? Seeing none, thank you very much, city attorney. Seeing no further business before, I'm sorry. Yes. Seeing no further business before the city council study session, this meeting is adjourned. Thanks, everybody.
Well, have a good night.
Thank you.